Section 1. On the 12th day of the White Waste, Lena Marlowe learned that Frost Hollow had a heartbeat, and that when you could finally hear it, you were already standing somewhere you should not be. It came up through the soles of her boots at the noon halt, a slow, vast, subterranean thud, like something enormous turning over in its sleep beneath 40 feet of ice. She stood very still on the black glass of the caravan road, a small figure in furs at the center of a horizon-wide nothing, and looked down between her feet, and the ice looked back, blue-white, depthless, and faintly, impossibly, lit from below. Veilless. She kept her voice level, trauma bay level. The ground has a pulse. The captain crunched over, followed the line of her gaze, and went. She had learned to read even his stillnesses now, 1 entire degree stiller. Everyone off the road, Veilless said quietly. Now. 12 days, and the White Country had been almost merciful. That should have warned them. Erling's ghost could have told them, in his dry winter voice, that Frost Hollow's mercy was just its way of letting you get too far in to run. The company had made good time down out of the Kant foothills and onto the great frozen fenlands where the caravan roads ran. Those famous ribbons of black glass, which Lena had assumed to be a poet's phrase until she stood on one and understood, with a small vertigo, that it was engineering. The dwarves had built them in the deep past. Roadbeds of crushed dark stone fused and sealed beneath the ice by firecraft nobody living remembered, so that the roads froze smooth and black and true every winter, straight as scalpel cuts across a country that swallowed everything else. You could walk 30 miles a day on the black glass. Beside it, in the white, you'd make 8 and lose a toe. The rules of the road, Veilless had drilled into them at every camp, were 3 and dwarven and old. Stay on the black, burn small, and if the ice sings to you, do not sing back. Lena had catalogued the country the way she catalogued a new ward. The cold itself was the senior consultant, patient, omnipresent, killing nothing quickly, auditing everything. She had rewritten the company's marching order around it within 2 days, rotating the windward flank the way burn units rotate pressure points, mandatory mitten buddy checks for the white patches of frostnip that no one could see on their own nose, hot water bottles of soup slung inside coats against the core. The 4 quiet wardens had accepted the new protocols the way they accepted weather. Phelan had turned them into a game, then into a song, then, after Veilless's third glare, into a very quiet song. And the land had let them come. Under 2 moons and a sky like the inside of a bell, past the orange chimney glows of dwarf holds burning far off under the ice like coals banked in ash, never nearer than the horizon. The company's whole design was to pass unannounced, down the long black line east by south, 10 souls walking an enemy's maze backwards, toward giants who had deleted the word for what Morvath was. On the 11th night, Ithreni had stood a long time looking at the sky and said one word. 2. Too what? Too clear, too still, too kind. She'd nodded at the northern horizon, where the stars stopped in a line too straight to be cloud. In the passes we call that the indrawn breath. Frost Hollow is about to say something. The Knights of the Crossing had developed their own liturgy by then. Camp in the lee of whatever the fen offered. Ithreni's pans, watches in pairs. Lena stood hers with Doramir, an arrangement the company had ratified by elaborately failing to comment on it, and the watches had become the place where the 2 of them kept the other inventory, the one that had no protocol. He was grieving in the elven way, she had learned, not in waves, but in visits, moments when his father arrived in him, a turn of phrase, a way of reading weather, and had to be hosted. On the 8th night, he'd said, out of long silence, he would have despised this country, too flat, nowhere to put a decent throne, and then laughed, once, wrecked, and she had put her shoulder against his and kept the watch while the visit lasted, and there was the matter of the tear. It had begun on the 9th night, when the road passed within a long horizon of the first orange chimney glow. The crystal's deep 10,000-year pulse had stuttered, quickened for an hour, then settled. It had done it again at the next distant hold, and again at the third. It answers them, Doramir had said, troubled. Hand over the crystal. The holds, or something in them. It has never done this in the mountain. Lena had filed it, the way she filed all the symptoms that had not yet declared their disease, next to a pool's last unanswered question and a clock that had started ticking in another universe. The file was getting heavy. In that other universe, at that particular hour, It was 3:26 in the morning, and St. Aldrich's Hospital had gone quietly out of its mind. The corridor outside Bay 6 held 11 people, 4 protocols, and no explanations. A patient had vanished from a locked observation ward between one camera frame and the next. The recording did not glitch. She was simply present, then not, the blanket still holding the shape of her. And the attending physician of record, Dr. L. Marlowe, had walked out of frame at 2:58 and not walked into any other frame in the building. Security had run the footage 19 times. The night administrator had said the words mass hysteria twice and believed them neither time. In Bay 6 itself, untouched per the responding officer's instructions, the ash mark on the pillow had stopped smouldering by 3:15, 5 small stars in a curving line, and a 6th, jagged, inverted, burned clean through the cotton to the foam beneath. And the youngest officer present, who would say nothing about it in her report, had noticed the thing nobody else let themselves notice. The ash was warm, the room was cold, and the mark was not random. It looked, she thought, exactly like a signature. And in the staff lot behind the building, unremarked by every camera, something man-shaped stood at parade rest in the sodium light, facing the emergency bay doors, and did not blink and cast. This the cameras would have shown, had any been pointed there. No shadow at all. It was not watching the hospital. It was waiting for someone to come back. And now, at the 12th noon, the ground had a pulse. The ice was lit faintly from below, and Velis was moving the company off the black glass with the particular unhurried speed that Lena knew from 100 corridors meant the hour is here. It's not a creature. Doromir had his palm flat on the road, the tear pulsing quick against his throat. And that was wrong too, Lena noted. The crystal had synchronized to something, and it wasn't his heart. It's water, moving water, under the fen ice. The whole country is a frozen marsh, and something has it flowing in midwinter. The hollow wind, Velis said grimly, watching the northern line of stopped stars, which was taller now and nearer. Dwarf lore. Twice a generation, a warm river rises under the fen, and the white throat comes down from the north to argue with it. Icequake, then ground blizzard, the roads survive it. He looked at their 2 laden stags, at the 10 of them, at the world's supply of nowhere in every direction. Travelers, sometimes. How long? The breath is drawn, Ithreni said. It speaks by dark. They ran the black glass east all afternoon, hunting shelter on a map that promised a caravan way station at the next great milestone. And the white throat, courteous as everything else that had ever hunted Lena across 2 worlds, waited until they could see the way station's snow-buried cairn in the last light before it spoke. The sound arrived first, a note more felt than heard. The bell sky finally struck. Then the northern horizon stood up, a wall of white going up into the dark like the world's page being turned. And the ground pulse under their boots doubled and doubled again, and the black road rang. Off the road! Velis roared, because the road was a bell now, a conductor, the Quake's chosen instrument, and the company floundered into the white toward the cairn, and the world came apart. Lena would keep the next quarter hour all her life in the way she kept the worst codes, as procedure, because procedure was the rope across it. The icequake rolled through the fen in visible waves, house-high slabs of frozen marsh shrugging and grinding. The ground blizzard hit sideways a heartbeat later and deleted the sky, the horizon, the company, the whole world reduced to the rope Velis had them all clipped to, and the Count Lena was already shouting down its length, 1 to 10, name by name, sound off, and 9 voices answered. Phelan! The fen had opened under him between one wave and the next, a black seam of that impossible warm water, 6 feet wide, smoking in the cold, and the rope had held. Thank both moons and Velis's paranoia, the rope had held. They hauled him out in 11 seconds by Lena's count, and 11 seconds was enough. He came out soaked to the collarbone in midwinter, in a ground blizzard, 40 unknown feet from shelter, and the senior consultant of the White Country began, patiently, to kill him. Cairn, now! Lena had his sodden outer furs off before he finished gasping. Wet insulation was a body bag, first law of the cold, and Doromir simply picked the boy up whole, king and tear and all, and carried him through the screaming white, while Velis found the cairn by memory and dead reckoning, and the way station's half-buried door gave to Ithreni's shoulder, and the 10 of them fell down its steps into the dark and the still and the blessed, blessed windlessness of a stone room built by dwarves for exactly this hour. What followed was the hour that does not negotiate in a buried room by the light of one storm lantern, and Lena ran it like the code it was. Phelan was grey, shuddering in great useless spasms, core temperature falling off the cliff that drowning cold makes. She stripped him to the skin and into every dry layer the company owned, packed the soup bottles at his chest and groin and neck. Core first, always core first. Warm the limbs of a man that cold, and the chilled blood comes home all at once and stops the heart. And when the shuddering began to fail, which is the body giving up its own engine, she did the thing the elves of the healing halls had wept at once before, and lay down against him under the piled furs, with Ithreni bracketing his other side, 2 living furnaces lending a boy their fire, her count at his throat, out loud, steady, 3 and then 1, 3 and then 1, while outside the white throat spent its rage on 40 feet of dwarven stone. Somewhere past the second hour, Phelan's shuddering steadied, deepened, became honest shivering, the body's engine catching again, and the boy soldier surfaced enough to whisper, teeth still castanets. Does this mean I outrank the K-King? He carried my baggage. Sleep, Lena said, and her voice did the thing it did, the wobble she permitted. Or I will tell your former guard company you cried. Cease slander. Healer's own oath. What happens under the furs, stays. He slept. Around the storm lantern, quietly, the company breathed out, and Doromir, who had stood the whole code with his back against the door and his eyes on her, she'd felt them the way you feel heat, crossed the little stone room, knelt and pressed his forehead briefly to Phelan's, king to soldier, in some old gesture that needed no lore master, then to Lena's, longer. 12 days, he murmured, for her only, and already the White Country has learned what the mountain learned. It cannot have him. You were between them the whole way down that rope, you know, before the ice even opened. You'd already moved. It's called anticipating the differential. Her forehead stayed against his one further breath. Also filed under, if this world takes that boy, I will fight it. If you have ever kept watch over someone pulled back from an edge, you know the particular quality of that lantern-lit quiet, not relief, exactly, inventory. Counting what the hour did not take, and learning what it cost to keep it. It was in that quiet, in the third hour, taking her own advice and finally examining the room they had all fallen into, that Lena's eyes found the wall and the quiet ended. The waystation was old dwarven work, one deep square chamber, benches and hearth and store alcoves cut clean from the living stone, everything dressed with the sober excellence Erling's lessons had taught her to expect. But the far wall above the cold hearth had been used. Recently, the soot of past travelers' fires had been wiped back in a great deliberate circle, and into the cleared stone something had scratched, not carved, scratched, hard and fast, with a point that had skipped and gouged. Row upon row of the flowing elven script Lena had spent a season learning to read. The same word, the whole wall. 50 times, 100, the gouges deepening as they descended, the last few driven so hard the point had snapped and been replaced and driven again. Violis raised the storm lantern. The company read it together, in silence, in the buried dark of the White Country's one shelter, while the storm walked overhead. Sareth, 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 Sareth. And beneath the final, deepest gouging of the river's name, in a different hand, smaller, controlled, the letters of someone forcing calm through a shaking wrist, a single line, it is not a river. Ithreni broke the silence at last, practical as a splint. Whoever they were, they sheltered here, they burned the benches from the far alcove, and they left going east, weeks ago, by the soot. A pause. One set of boots. They inventoried the rest of the room the way Lena inventoried a scene before the ambulance report, everything a symptom until sorted. The traveler had lived here some time, days at least, perhaps a week. He had been provisioned like a soldier. The store alcove held the neat leavings of field rations portioned and rotated. Dwarven trailbread wrappers folded into precise squares, a habit with a uniform somewhere behind it. He had repaired his gear at the hearth. A bone needle, snapped and waxed thread ends swept into a tidy pile, even in extremity, even alone at the world's edge. He had melted fen ice for water in the station kettle and scoured it clean afterward, and something about that undid Lena more than the wall did. The discipline of a man keeping himself human by keeping the smallest faiths 100 leagues past the last eye that would ever check. And on the bench nearest the scratched wall, half under it, as if it had fallen or been set down mid-thought, Valis's lantern found the last thing, a child's toy. A tiny bow, elf-made, palm-sized, the kind the Fletchers of Cantalar carved for name days, decades old, its string long rotted, its grip worn to a polish that only years of one small hand could give. Doramir picked it up as if it might still be warm, and stood very still. "Mine," he said at last, quietly. "He made it for my 9th winter. I thought it lost. I lost everything of his after. My father had the rooms cleared." His thumb moved once over the worn grip, 30 years of eastern hunts standing in his face. He kept it. Through the bridge, through the ash, through whatever he is now, he carried it here. One traveller. His voice stayed careful, but the care was costing him now. Alone, in Frost Hollow, in winter, writing our river's name until the knife broke, with my 9th winter in his pocket. He looked at Lena, and neither of them said the name that stood in the buried room with them, broad-shouldered and grey-uniformed, 30 years homesick. Neither of them had to. That was when the door, the deep dwarven door at the top of the steps, shoulder shut against the storm, with the white throat still audibly dying overhead, knocked. 3 measured blows, unhurried, polite as candlelight. The company came up off the benches as one, blades and bows out of nowhere, Phelan struggling up through his furs, Doramir putting himself and the tear both squarely between the door and everyone, and Valis, lantern high, mounted the steps and drew the bolt, because the second law of the roads was dwarven too and absolute. No soul is refused shelter in the white throat. The storm fell into the room, and with it, out of the screaming dark, dwarves, 8 of them, in great riveted storm coats of leather and ringmail, ice in their braided beards, short heavy bows already drawn. A road patrol of the northern holds, and Lena's first living dwarves, were exactly and nothing like Erling's lessons, shorter than her by a head, wider than Doramir, and carrying their authority like their pauldrons, riveted on. They came down the steps in a practiced wedge, storm shutters slamming behind them, and the buried room stood at the oldest impasse in the world, drawn bows and drawn blades, 10 and 8, in a shelter whose one law forbade exactly this. Elves. The patrol captain's voice came out of the ice in his beard like gravel out of a chute, and the word carried 30 years in it. Elves, under the ice, on the deep roads, unannounced. His drill-bit eyes moved across them, cataloguing, the leaf steel, the warden's bows, the boy in the furs, and stopped, hard, on Doramir. On the throat of Doramir. On the slow teal pulse of the tear of the first tree, which no hood or collar had ever yet persuaded to be secret. The dwarf's breath left him. By the deep anvil. 30 years, the holds are told the mountain folk keep to their mountain. 30 years of silence and forged peace. And now the ice quakes, the throat comes down early, and the heart of the elves walks into my patrol round hung on a... The catalogue reached the pointed ears, the circlet's ghost, the bearing, and arrived on a king. On their king, under our ice, with no herald, no embassy, no... And then his eyes found the small human woman with the stethoscope and the drum bead at her throat, and the sentence died in the storm-cold air. Everything in the buried room changed key. The drawn bows behind him wavered, not lowered, wavered like instruments losing their note, and the captain of the road patrol went white as the storm above, and did the very last thing on 2 worlds that Lena was braced for. He bowed. "By the anvil," the dwarf captain said hoarsely, into the frozen silence. The green-eyed healer, exactly as he tells it, the pale serpent that listens to hearts, and the little drum beside it, the gold hair, the counting eyes. He straightened, and in his storm-scoured face awe and dread were grinding together like fen ice, and his voice dropped as if the storm itself should not hear the rest. "You are real. All my life a story, and you are real, and you have come in the quake winter, exactly as he said you would." He turned to his patrol and barked something in the deep tongue that sent 2 of them back up into the white throat's dying edges at a run. Messengers, Lena understood, with the cold opening in her stomach, and then he turned back to her and bowed again, lower. "Lady, the Deep King must know you have come. He has been dreaming of you." A swallow, and the drill-bit eyes came up full of something no road captain's eyes should ever hold. "He has been dreaming of you for 11 years. Section 2. They went down into the earth at dawn, and Lena discovered that everything she had learned about wonder on the mountain of the elves had only been the first semester. The patrol led them east off the black glass to a cliff of blue fen ice that looked like nothing at all, until the captain, whose name was Derm, struck it twice with the flat of his axe in a pattern too quick to follow, and 40 feet of frozen wall swung inward on hinges of oiled stone, and warm air rolled out over the company like a tide, smelling of coal smoke, bread, wet iron, and 10,000 years of lamplit industry. "The Ember Way," Derm said, with the studied carelessness of a man showing strangers the thing his whole civilization was proudest of. "Mind the third step. It is a door." The Ember Way was a road under the roads, a gallery highway carved through the living permafrost and shored with pillars of fused stone, wide enough for 6 wagons abreast, lit its whole visible length by channels of glowing orange coal glass set into the walls like veins of tame fire. Traffic moved on it even at this hour. Ore sledges behind shaggy, steaming muskoxen, merchants' trains, a dwarf child riding a father's shoulders, who pointed at the elves with an expression of pure scandalized delight and was shushed with a speed that told Lena everything about the last 30 years. They walked half a day through the underworld's morning, and the Ember Way grew, joined by tributary galleries, swelled by traffic, roofed ever higher, until it bent around a final colossal pillar and became a balcony, and the balcony looked out, and Lena stopped walking, and so, she was gratified to note, did the king of the elves. The undervault. It filled a cavern that had no business existing, a hollow under the fen, vast enough to hold weather, its ceiling of ancient blue ice glowing far overhead, with the filtered ghost of the daylight 40 feet above it, so that the whole city below lay bathed in a deep submarine twilight. And against that cold blue, the city burned. Tier upon tier of stone-built terraces descended the cavern walls like an amphitheater for giants, every window a coal-orange star. Foundries down on the cavern floor breathed slow pillars of spark-lit smoke. Canals of meltwater, running warm from the deep vents, wound between the districts under 100 bridges. And over it all, at the cavern's heart, rose the anvil, a mountain inside the mountain. A single freestanding tower of dark stone, shaped in the deep past into the seat of the deep kings, its summit crowned not with a spire but with a forge whose fire, Derm said, had not gone out in 6,000 years. "Breathe, healer," Ithreni murmured beside her, amused. "You have gone the color of the ceiling." "I grew up," Lena said, "being told dwarves lived in holes." Derm barked something in the deep tongue that made his whole patrol grin into their beards. "We do, lady," he said. "We are simply better at holes than anyone alive." They descended by the stair of guilds, and the city resolved around them, detail by detail, the way a chart resolves under good light. Districts named for their crafts and smelling of them, the sweet resin of the wrightworks, the mineral bite of the smelteries, a whole warm terrace that was nothing but bakeries, venting their ovens into the canal mist. Bridge shrines at every crossing, each holding one ancestral lamp, lit. And everywhere the sound Lena would afterward mean when she said undervault, 10,000 hammers at 10,000 rhythms, blended by the cavern into a single vast patient pulse, as if the city were one great chest, and every dwarf in it part of the count. And if you have ever watched a stereotype die in front of you, watched a whole people turn out to be a civilization where you'd been promised a footnote, you know the specific shame-flavored awe Lena carried down the last mile into the burning blue city. The awe lasted exactly that mile. Then came the politics. Word had run ahead of them down the Ember Way. Word always ran ahead in every world Lena had ever lived in, and the streets of the upper terraces were lined by the time the company descended into them. Not with cheering, with watching. Thousands of dwarves in doorways and on balconies, at forge mouths and bridge rails, arms folded, faces shut, watching 30 years of grievance walk through their city, wearing leaf steel. Lena had read the file. Erling himself had written most of it into her, on the long evenings. When the first quest shattered on the ice bridge, it was the dwarves who had lost the most beside the elves. 2 full companies of the northern holds had marched to join the relic gathering that never came, and had been caught on the open fen by the Terima reprisals that followed, and the holds had buried 400, and called the elves fools who armed strangers, and sealed the deep roads, and the 30-year silence had begun. To the mountain, it was grief. Down here, Lena understood, reading the shut faces. It had compounded into something with interest. The elves had gambled the world on a human, lost 400 dwarves on the margin call, and then never come down to say so. And now, the mountain's new king walked their streets unannounced, with the tear of the first tree, which no hood had ever yet persuaded to be secret, pulsing its slow teal heartbeat at his throat, and beside him, worse, another human. Nobody threw anything. That, Valus observed later, had honestly surprised him. What they did was harder to armor against. As the company crossed the great bridge to the anvil's root, an old dwarf woman stepped out of the watching line, stumped directly into their path, planted herself in front of Doramir, king, Tyr, escort and all, and held up in both hands a miner's lamp, the old kind, its little door open, its wick long dead. 400 lamps went out on the fen, elf, she said, in trade tongue, loud enough for 3 terraces. My sons carried 2 of them. 30 years, and no one from the mountain ever came down to relight so much as one. She set the dead lamp on the bridge stones at his feet, like an indictment. Why should the ice believe you now? The escort tensed, the terraces leaned in, and Lena watched the king of the Kant Peaks, who had faced a Terima across his father's body without blinking, look down at a dead lamp and go, for one long moment, entirely to sea. He had been raised to thrones and hunts and courtly grief. Nothing in 9 decades had taught him what to do when a mother hands you the bill. It was the season at a dying king's bedside that answered. Lena saw him find it, saw him reach for his father's last lessons the way she reached for protocols, and the king of the elves knelt on the bridge stones of the undervault, in front of 3 terraces of his people's oldest grudge, and picked up the dead lamp with both hands. Because I am not here to ask the ice to believe me, Doramir said, in the deep tongue, accented, careful, learned in a season from loremasters, and the sound of it went through the watching crowd like current. I am here to pay a debt before I ask anything at all. 400 lamps. The mountain acknowledges everyone, 30 years late, beginning with your sons. He rose, holding the lamp. I will carry this until it burns again. When your king and I are done speaking, mother, come to me and give me their names. Silence, 3 terraces deep. Then the old woman looked him up and down once, the lamp, the tear, the strange grave young king holding a dead thing with both hands like it outweighed his crown, and delivered the verdict of the undervault in 6 flat words. Their names are Bram and Otter, and turned and stumped back into the crowd, which closed around her, and changed, not warmed, not yet. Nothing under the ice warmed in an hour, but changed, the way a shut door changes when someone inside puts a hand on the bolt. Note for the record, Phelan murmured behind Lena, husky-voiced and still blanket-wrapped on the baggage stag. The king just conquered a city with a broken lamp. The king, Valus said, listened to his father's healer for a season. Mind the 3rd step. It is a door. They were housed in the guest delvings at the anvil's root, clean deep rooms, blessedly warm, with the canal running lamplit past the windows. And it was there, in the 2 hours before the Deep King's summons, that Durham the road captain paid them the visit that was not on any protocol, and earned Lena's permanent regard by doing the hardest thing a proud soldier can do in front of foreigners, warning them about his own people. You will be told the undervault is of one mind, he said, standing square in their doorway, helmet under his arm, voice pitched low. It is not. There is a brotherhood in the deep terraces. They call themselves the Emberbound. Old families, old grief, and one very old idea, that the cup's promise is real, and that the holds have been ruled for 10,000 years by kings too timid to use it. His drill-bit eyes went, deliberately, to Doramir, to the throat of Doramir. For 1,000 years their idea has starved, lady, for a simple lack of groceries. There has not been an elf under the ice in living memory. And this morning, the deep roads carried them the word that the Deep King's own patrol has escorted the king of the elves, 900 years of the long blood, walking, warm, into the middle of their city. He let that sit. They will smile at you on the bridges, some of them sincerely. Count your escort anyway, and do not let your king walk the low terraces, and, forgive me the saying of it, do not let him bleed where anyone can see. Under the ice, his blood is not blood. It is theology. Noted, Lena said, and meant it to the bone. Captain, why tell us? Durham shifted the helmet under his arm, and for a moment the storm-scoured face showed the thing underneath 30 years of sealed roads. Because my Deep King has dreamed of you since I was a young man, lady, and I have watched him carry it alone the whole time, mending lamps at midnight like a man paying interest on a debt nobody will name. He straightened. Whatever you have come to be it quickly. The holds have been holding their breath for 11 years. Breath held too long goes bad. If you have ever been warned by an honest man against his own house, you know it is the most expensive gift a stranger can give, and that it is never given twice. The Hall of the Deep King was not what the anvil's exterior promised, and the mismatch, Lena would think afterward, was the whole message. Outside, 6,000 years of unquenched forge fire, a tower like a raised fist. Inside, at the summit, past guards in ancestral iron, a room hardly larger than Erling's bedchamber, low-ceilinged, warm, lined floor to roof with ledgers, and at a broad work table of scarred oak, in plain forged leathers, mending the hinge of a miner's lamp with his own square hands, sat the Deep King of all the holds. Skalvar Emberoth was old, the way anvils are old, shaped by use into exactly himself. His beard was iron grey and braided with plain steel rings. His forearms were a chronicle of 60 years of forge scars, and when he looked up at the company, his eyes were the orange-lit black of a banked coal, and they went past the elves, past the tier, past protocol and history, and the whole shape of the diplomatic hour, and fixed on Lena, and the lamp hinge stilled in his hands. For a long moment, the Deep King of the Undervault simply looked at her, the way you look at weather finally arriving. Green eyes, he said at last, in trade tongue, in a voice like the bottom of a mine. Gold hair, the pale serpent, the little drum. He set down the lamp with enormous care, as if it had become suddenly breakable, and stood. 11 years, healer. 11 years I have dreamed you. Since the night of the deep bells, when every hold from here to the canyons woke at the same hour, for no cause the wardens ever found. 11 years, one dream, always the same. He came around the work table, and he barely reached her shoulder, and he filled the room. You stand at a river, you hold my people's cup, and you pour. What do I pour, King? Lena asked quietly. That, said Skalvar Emberoth, is the question that has kept a Deep King mending lamps at midnight for 11 years. He gestured, and a legerman scurried, and the low, warm room filled with the company and with chairs, and the Deep King told it, plainly, economically, a miner reporting a seam. But first Lena told him, because a colleague's rule held in every world she had practiced in, histories are exchanged, not extracted. She gave him the way station, the wall of gouged Sareths, the broken knife, the one set of boots going east, the single controlled line beneath the river's name. At it is not a river, the Deep King's scarred hands went flat on the oak table and stayed there, and he and Doramir exchanged the look of two rulers, discovering their separate hauntings kept the same handwriting. She gave him, spare and clinical, the shape of the war above, the wound between the worlds, the 5 holy things, the enemy who did not fear their gathering, but the hand that gathered. She did not yet give him the 11-year sentry in a fluorescent corridor. That card burned in her hand. She held it. Triage. So the mountain finally knows what the deep has dreamed. Skalvar rumbled. Good. Then hear the dream entire. Some nights the cup pours light. It runs into the river, and the river takes fire like the Emberway, and the fire runs both ways past the edges of the dream, and I wake weeping like a boy, and cannot say why. Other nights, the coal-black eyes did not flinch, but the voice paid a toll. The cup pours nothing, empty, and in the empty dream the river stands up, healer. It stands up off its bed like a serpent off warm stone, and it looks at me, and it is not water, and I wake with this. He turned his forearm over. Among the 60 years of honest forge scars, quite distinct, lay a mark Lena's whole body recognized before her mind did. Fine, spiraling, deliberate lines, like writing, like frost, like the burns on a curly-haired stranger at 2:58 in the morning, 1 universe ago. It is not a river, said a broken knife gouging, in a buried room 12 days behind them. Lena was moving before protocol could vote. Around the work table, the healer's reflex overriding the room, and the Deep King of all the holds surrendered his forearm to a foreign human's examination with the meekness of a man who had waited 11 years for anyone to take the mark clinically. She read it with fingers and eyes. Old scarring at the deepest lines, newer tracery feathering the edges. It's grown, she said, slowly, outward. King Skalvar, the nights the dream pours empty, have they been coming more often? Every 7th night, for 11 years, regular as shift bells. The coal eyes held hers, until this past season. Now it is every 3rd. Every 3rd. Since the season an elf king had died, and a keyhole had opened above his stilled heart, and a clock in another universe had started ticking. Lena filed it in the heavy file, the one with no disease name yet, and her voice came out flat under the weight. "This writing is the same alphabet the enemy left in a dead king's chest and a living prophet's skin. Whatever authors your dreams, king, it uses the enemy's ink. A beat. Or the enemy has been borrowing its." "The same dream, 11 years, Doramir said slowly. "King Skalvar, 11 years ago, on the night of the deep bells. What else happened that night? Here, in the holds? I will show you what happened." The Deep King said, "Because it is why you have all come, whether you knew it or not." He crossed to the room's one window, a slit of forge light overlooking the burning blue city, and stood with his back to them, and his voice went to the flat register that Lena had learned, in every world, meant a wound being reported by its owner. "My father held this room before me, Deep King Harek, 90 years on the anvil, the finest of us in 10 generations, and the keeper, as every Deep King is keeper, of the Golden Cup. You know our belief. The whole world knows our belief, and mocks it politely at a distance, that whoever drinks elf blood from the cup will not die. I will tell you what only Deep Kings know, healer, because your dream and mine are apparently already acquainted." He turned. "It is not a belief. It is a warning, miswritten by time into a promise. The old ledgers do not say the cup grants immortality. They say the cup must never be allowed to make the deathless, that filled with the blood of the long-lived, it becomes a door for something that does not die, and the fools of later ages heard, becomes deathless and began to dream of drinking. 10,000 years, my line has kept a door and called it a treasure, because a treasure is easier to guard than a truth." The room had gone very cold for a place heated by 6,000 years of forge. 11 years ago, on the night of the deep bells, my father rose from his bed, took the cup from the sealed vault that only a Deep King's hand can open, spoke to no one, left his seal, his rings, and his reason on this table, and walked down, past the lower holds, past the last lamps, onto the deep roads that run under the fen toward the hollow deep, where nothing has been mined in 1,000 years, and where the wardens who followed his tracks found them ending at the Stair of Silence, going down. Skalvar's square hands closed on the back of his chair. No dwarf walks past the stair. He was Deep King. The warden's oaths broke against his rank like water. They watched their king carry the door of the deathless down into the dark, alone, and their last sight of him, every man of them reported it identically, and every man of them has since given up lamps for the open ice, was of my father stopping on the 90th step, turning and saying, in a voice they all swore was glad, "Tell my son, it is not a river. And she comes in 11 years. Keep the roads." The silence in the low warm room was total. Somewhere below, the undervault hummed its coal-orange hum, 10,000 lives banked against the dark. "So you understand," said Skalvar Emberoth, Deep King of all the holds, looking at the small human woman his father had walked into the earth announcing, "Why my roads found you in one storm, why my patrols carry your description like scripture, and why I have mended lamps at midnight for 11 years. You have come for the cup, healer, and the cup." The deep bells rang. Not one, all of them, every bell in every hold, the same impossible unison the wardens had never explained. 11 years of silence shattering in a single bronze instant that made the ledgers shiver on their shelves, and under the bells, rising through the stone of the anvil itself from the roots of the world, came a sound like a mountain clearing its throat, and running feet on the stair, and a warden bursting through the door with his beard full of dust and his eyes full of the end of the world. Deep King, the Stair of Silence, the watchers at the last lamp. He caught the doorframe and said it, the sentence 11 years in the coming. Deep Father is climbing. Section 3. There are 1,100 steps on the Stair of Silence, and Deep King Harek Emberoth had been climbing them for 3 days. That was the fact, reported by relays of grey-faced wardens, confirmed at the war table in the anvil's root, repeated down the terraces in whispers that emptied taverns, which broke the undervault's composure more thoroughly than the bells had. Not that Deep Father was climbing, that he was climbing slowly. The watchers at the last lamp had first sighted him 3 days before the bells rang, far down in the dark, below the final landing, a figure with a light, ascending. A strong dwarf climbs the stair in half a day, a dying one, in 2. The figure in the dark had been taking the steps one at a time, with long stillnesses between them, and the bells, the wardens now understood, had not announced his return. They had announced the moment he crossed the 90th step from the top. The step where, 11 years ago, he had turned and said she comes in 11 years. He is pacing himself to something, Violis said quietly, studying the warden relay reports at the war table like troop movements. Or something is pacing him to it. To what? Skalvar's voice had gravel and old grief in it. Lena looked at the ledger-lined room, at the coal-eyed king who had mended lamps for 11 years, and said the thing everyone at the table already knew. To us, he waited for the bells to say we'd arrived. King Skalvar, your father isn't climbing home. She touched the relay report, the neat warden's script recording stillnesses and steps. He's climbing to an appointment. The war table had one more piece of business before the descent, and it arrived, as trouble under the ice apparently preferred to, politely. He was announced as Master Vade of the 9th Deep Terrace, Guildmaster of the Saltworks, and he came before the two kings with an honor guard of exactly none, a broad, silver-bearded dwarf of open face and beautiful manners, bearing a petition scroll with 4,000 seals upon it, and Lena disliked him within a minute and spent the rest of the audience clinically interrogating her own dislike because it had no symptom to point to. He was respectful, he was reasonable, he was, and this was the thing, delighted. Delight rolled off him in warm waves while a city shook, and grief and dread were the room's native weather, and a man radiating the wrong climate was a man whose inner forecast came from somewhere else. Deep King, Majesty, Lady Healer. Vade bowed to each with unimpeachable measure. The 9th Terrace and the Deep Guilds share the city's awe at this hour. We petition only that it be read rightly. He laid the scroll on the war table with the tenderness of a man laying down a child. 11 years, the holds have grieved a king who walked into the dark. Now the bells ring, and Deep Father climbs. In the very season, the king of the elves comes under the ice for the first time in living memory. 4,000 of the Deep Terraces have signed their reading of the signs, and it is simple, and it is old. The hour of the cup has come, the vessel returns. The long blood walks among us, freely given. The open face turned warmly to Doromir, and Lena felt Veilis behind her become very still. Or so we must hope, for what king would come so far to see a wound closed, and grudge the cup a cupful? The silence that followed had edges. It was Skalvar who broke it, coal-eyed, flat. The cup's law is the Deep King's law, Master Vade, and the Deep King has not changed it. The cup makes nothing immortal but the grief of fools. Your petition is received. Your terraces are commended for their piety. And if any hand of the 9th Deep so much as weighs a drop of elven blood in its imagination, I will personally acquaint that hand with the forge that never goes out. Read those signs. You are dismissed. Vade bowed, delighted, gracious, entirely unpunctured, gathered his scroll, and paused at the door with the timing of a man who had rehearsed his exit before writing his entrance. Of course, Deep King, though I would gently note, the warm eyes touched Lena, one heartbeat, like a finger testing a blade, that the law of the cup has always rested on one comfort, that the cup was lost. By tonight, by all accounts, it will be home. Laws rest so much less easily, he said, smiling at the whole room, on things within reach. The door closed on him beautifully. 4,000 seals, Doromir said at last, quietly. 4,000 he admits to, said Veilis. They went down to meet it, because there was never any question of anything else. The procession that descended through the lower holds toward the Stair of Silence was the strangest of Lena's two lives. The Deep King of the underwater in his father's iron, flanked by the ancestral guard. The king of the elves, hood down now. Skalvar had growled that under his ice his guests hid from no one, the tear pulsing quick and quicker as they went deeper, answering something, the healer of two worlds. And behind them, gathering at every terrace despite every order, the city. They could not be kept back. 11 years the undervault had lived inside a held breath, and now the whole population seemed to drain downward through the stone like water finding its level, until the great galleried vault above the stair's final landing, the Lampfather's Gallery, built for solemn hundreds, held silent thousands, terraced up into the dark, every soul carrying an unlit lamp. That was dwarf law too, Durm murmured to the company on the way down. For the dead of the deep roads, you carried your lamp dark. You lit it only if they came home. The vigil in the gallery lasted through the turning of a shift bell, and Lena spent it doing rounds, because a held breath that size was itself a patient. She moved along the front terraces with Ithreni, quietly treating what 10,000 people standing rigid in the cold produce, the faints, the cramping calves, an old lampfather whose heart was throwing extra beats from pure dread, and who gripped her wrist and whispered, "I stood this same stone 11 years ago, lady, and lit nothing. Tell me true, do the climbing dead come home?" And she had no answer from either of her worlds, so she gave him the only one she owned. She put his own hand over his own heart, and kept it there with hers until the rhythm steadied, and said, "Whatever comes up those stairs, you'll meet it alive. That I can do." Word of that moved along the terraces too, the way everything moved under the ice, and lamps that had begun to shake steadied, one by one, holding their darkness with better grace. The Stair of Silence itself began without ceremony, which made it worse, a plain broad stairhead at the gallery's floor, worked stone descending into black, flanked by 2 pillars bearing the only inscription, in deep runes so old Skalvar himself read them with care. "Below this step, the mountain owes you nothing." They waited at the stairhead, kings and companies, and a breath-held city, and the sound came up out of the dark to meet them long before the light did. A step, stone-soft, unhurried. Then the long stillness, 30 heartbeats, 40. Lena counted, she could not help counting. And then another step, and beneath the steps, rising with the faint glow now kindling far down the shaft, another sound, low and continuous, and it took Lena a long moment to identify it, because it was so profoundly wrong in that place. Water, moving water. The sound of a river, calm and broad, carried up 1,100 steps from a country of frozen silence where no river ran. Steady, Valis breathed, to everyone and no one. The light climbed, the steps came, and Deep King Harek Emberoth, 11 years gone, walked up out of the Stair of Silence into the lamplight of 10,000 of his people, and the held breath of the undervault made a sound Lena would never afterward be able to describe, grief and awe colliding in 10,000 chests at once, because he had come home, and he had not come home at all. He looked exactly as he had looked on the night of the deep bells. Exactly. Skalvar had shown them the memorial portrait at the war table. This was it, unaged, unworn, the same iron-braided beard without one new thread of white, the same forge-scarred hands, the same deep-set eyes under the heavy Emberoth brow. 11 years below the last lamp, and time had not touched him, and that, Lena's clinical eye reported with rising alarm, was not the wrong thing. The wrong thing was the stillness. He stood at the stairhead the way the Fenai stood, perfectly, patiently, lit faintly from below. His chest did not visibly rise. His eyes, when they passed over the gallery, were his own deep brown, and behind the brown, in the way the ice had been behind the noon light, something else was faintly, unmistakably shining. And in his hands, carried before him the way the old woman had carried her dead lamp, was the golden cup. It was smaller than legend wanted, a plain, deep, 2-handed vessel of red gold, older than ornament, and it was full, filled to a hair's breadth below the brim with water so dark and so still it read as black, a disk of liquid night that did not tremble, did not shift, did not acknowledge 1,100 steps of climbing or the shaking of 10,000 watching lamps, full and level and wrong, the way the white throat's warm seam had been wrong, water where no water should be, obeying something other than the room. No one moved. 10,000 dwarves and 2 kings and the flower of 2 worlds' courage stood rooted, and so it was, of course, the healer who stepped out onto the open stone of the stairhead, alone, because standing rooted at the edge of the hour had never once been among the things Lena Marlowe knew how to do. Deep King Harek, her voice went out level across the gallery. "My name is Lena. I think you've been expecting me." The still figure turned to her. The first quick movement it had made, and the quickness was terrible, frictionless, like the turning of something that did not have to negotiate with weight. The deep brown eyes found her, and the shining behind them rose, and Deep King Harek Emberoth smiled at her with an expression she knew it, and her skin crawled with the knowing, the expression of the gladdest man on 2 worlds, the expression the wardens had reported from the 90th step 11 years ago. "Green eyes," it said, and the greeting was the 11-year litany. Gold hair, the pale serpent, the little drum. The voice was his own, Skalvar's voice, a register deeper, gravel and mine bottom, and threaded under it, inside it, the way the shining sat inside the brown, ran the sound of the river. two voices in one throat, speaking together, and neither of them was the enemy's ash on snow, and somehow that was worse. 11 years, and you are punctual to the bell. It is very pleased. It said you would be. It has watched you keep your hours a long time. May I? Lena said, and lifted the stethoscope from her neck, and the gallery watched, 10,000 silent, as the healer of two worlds examined the climbing dead by lamplight at the top of the Stair of Silence. He submitted the way Skalvar had submitted his forearm, gladly, meekly, a patient 11 years overdue for his appointment. Her findings, delivered later to the war table in the flat dialect of her trade, would rearrange the Undervault's theology more than any sermon. Skin warm, not fever warm, fen seam warm, warm in slow waves, like the water under the ice. A pulse. One beat, vast and unhurried, per counted minute, and the sound of it through the silver serpent was not a heart's two-step, but a single deep note, held, like the lowest string of an instrument the size of a country. Breath. Once per minute, tidal. Pupils, responsive, his own, and behind them the shining, which did not respond to her lamp at all, because it was not, her whole body understood, in the eyes. It was behind them, the way the noon light had been behind 40 feet of ice. He was not dead. He was not alive on any schedule she had ever charted. He was. She reached for it, and found only the fen, inhabited the way the ice was inhabited, a surface, faithfully keeping its shape, over something vast that moved on its own calendar. She lowered the stethoscope slowly and closed the strangest chart of two careers and looked up into the deep brown eyes and the shining behind them. You see, it said in the two braided voices, to the gallery, to the kings, with unmistakable satisfaction. She counts. It said you would count. The gallery's silence tilted. Skalvar made a sound low in his chest, his father's voice, after 11 years, saying madness, and started forward. Doromir's hand closed on his pauldron, king to king. Wait. It, Lena said, level, bedside. The thing below the stair, the thing that is not a river, deep king. Before anything else, I need to know what I'm speaking with. Are you Harrick Emberoth? The figure considered this with its head tilted, and the black disk of the cup considered it too, unrippled. Mostly, it said at last, judiciously, in both voices, more than you would fear, less than he would wish. The deep is wide, healer, and a soul must be held somehow, and it holds me the way I hold this cup, carefully, and full to the brim, and level, all the way up 1100 steps. Something moved through the borrowed and not borrowed face that was purely, heartbreakingly dwarf, pride of craft. I did not spill, 11 years and not one drop. Why? What is the cup carrying? But before the answer could come, Skalvar Emberoth broke. He crossed the open stone heavily, an old king in his father's iron, past Lena, past protocol, past 11 years of mended lamps, and stopped an arm's length from the figure at the stairhead. And the whole gallery watched the deep king of the undervault ask the question of a son and not a sovereign. Father, do you know me? The stillness that answered lasted 3 of Lena's counted heartbeats, and in it the shining behind the brown eyes seemed to recede, to step back deliberately, the way she stepped back from a bedside to let family through. And what looked out of Harrick Emberoth's face for the space of a breath was only Harrick Emberoth, a father, 11 years gone, finding his boy grown grey in the iron. Skalvar. One voice now, gravel alone, cracked down its whole length. You kept the roads, you kept the lamps. It shows me sometimes, when I ask. Midnight after midnight, my stubborn boy, mending what was never broken, so your hands would have somewhere to put the weighting. The forge-scarred hand rose and touched, briefly, clumsily, the iron pauldron, a smith checking a weld, a father failing to embrace across 11 years and 1 inhabitation. I have not the time it takes to say it properly. It lends me only so much of myself at once, so hear the short of it, and let the ledgers witness. You were the better king the day I left, and I knew it, and that is why I could go. The shining rose again, gentle as the fen filling a footprint, and the 2 voices rebraided. He weeps behind me now, your father. He asks it be recorded that he is proud. It is recorded. The water keeps everything. Skalvar Emberoth stood unmoving, 10,000 of his people watching, tears running silently into an iron-grey beard, and then did the most kingly thing Lena ever saw him do. He nodded, once, as at a report received, and stepped back and gave the hour to the world. Ask your question, healer, he said, wrecked and steady. The Undervault is listening. The answer, said Deep Father, to the only question that matters. The one you were sent across a universe to ask, and have been asking wrongly, in the wrong houses of the wrong rivers. The shining rose fully into the deep brown eyes now, fen ice at noon, and the gallery lamps guttered as one though no wind moved. The enemy above the ash believes the 5 holy things are keys to close a wound. The prophet between the worlds believes her healer is a key that must not turn. The mountain believes, the ice believes, the tall grass believes, everyone believes in the door, healer, and everyone is guarding and gathering and dreading the lock. He held the cup out toward her, black and level and full, across the open stone of the stairhead, and 10,000 dwarves stopped breathing. And not one of them has asked what the water remembers. Come down and ask. It will not deal with kings. It has had 10,000 years of kings, above and below, and it keeps their cups. It will deal with the one who counts. The 2 voices braided close and gentled, and the gentling was the most frightening thing yet. It has a message it has been holding for you, Green Eyes, longer than it has been holding me. Longer than 11 years. It asked me to deliver the proof. What proof? Deep Father set the cup down, set it, black and full and steady, on the topmost step of the Stair of Silence, on the very lip of the dark, where no hand in 10,000 could reach it without descending, and the whole gallery flinched from the small stone click of it, as one body. The relic of 10 millennia, the lost heart of the holds, home at last, and placed deliberately 1 step out of the world, on the far side of the only inscription its people feared. Below this step, the mountain owes you nothing. An offer and a fence in a single gesture. Come and take it. Know what taking costs. Somewhere in the terraced dark above, Lena heard a single lamp door click open, and after a long moment, click shut again, unlit. Then the figure crossed the last of the open stone to Lena, and before Vaelus's blade cleared, before Doramir moved, before her own body could vote, the thing that was mostly Harik Emberoth took her right hand in both of his forge-scarred own, gently, the way family takes a hand at a bedside, and squeezed 3 times, and then once. The gallery, the lamps, the kings, the 10,000, all of it went away. There was a corridor, fluorescent, humming. There was a white room at the end of it, and a plastic chair, and a pattern older than her medicine, older than her grief, the walking to school pattern, the one thing on 2 worlds that no stone, no spy, no enemy, no god had ever witnessed, except a 23-year-old girl and the first heartbeat she had ever loved, in the 9 minutes before it stopped. 3, and then 1. My girl. Lena heard the sound she made from very far away. Her knees went. Doramir was there before the stone was. She would piece that together afterward. The gallery was on its feet, 10,000 voices, Skalvar roaring orders, Vaelus's blade a bar of lamplight. And through all of it, gently, in 2 voices braided around a river, Deep Father of the Undervault delivered the message, 11 years and 1 universe in the carrying, the words arriving in her ears like warm water closing over her head. He says, my girl. He says, the specialist was always going to be 9 minutes late. It was never your count that failed. And he says, the deep brown eyes shone, glad, terrible, kind. The lamp in the window was mine. Come down, Lena. Your father and the river have a great deal to tell you. Section 4. They got her out of the gallery between them, Doramir and Ithreni, through a side gate of the anvil, with Vaelus clearing the way. And the last thing Lena registered of the public hour, over her own shoulder, through the wreckage of herself, was Deep Father standing serenely at the stairhead beside the black cup, hands folded, waiting with the patience of water, and 10,000 dwarves looking from the climbing dead to the collapsing healer and understanding, in one citywide intake of breath, that the prophecy they had waited 11 years to meet had a body, and the body had a breaking point, and something below the Stair of Silence had known exactly where it was. In the guest delvings, she stopped being carried, made it to a basin, and was efficiently, comprehensively sick. Then she sat down on the stone floor with her back against the wall, declined the bed, declined the chair, the floor was honest, and asked everyone but no one to leave, and the company, being the company, arranged itself instead at the exact distance of not leaving. Ithreni at the basin, Vaelus in the doorway, Phelan hovering with tea he'd made nobody, and Doramir on the floor beside her, back to the same wall, close enough that shoulders touched, silent as the watch. For a long time, the only sound was the canal outside the window, running warm from the deep vents. Water, everything down here, always, was water. 12 years, Lena said at last, to the room, to the canal, to no one. 12 years I've told this to other people in small rooms. The message you want to hear is the easiest lie to build. Psychics, mediums, the letters that come after obituaries. I've held the hands of 100 grieving strangers and explained, kindly, clinically, why the voice that knows their pet name isn't their dead. Cold reading, records, coincidence, cruelty. Her hands, in her lap, were doing something she watched with detached interest. The right thumb pressing the left palm, 3 and then 1, over and over, an animal checking a wound. I know the whole taxonomy, Doromir. I wrote chapters of it into younger doctors, and that thing took my hand, and it knew, and I have spent 2 hours failing to file it, because... The clinical voice cracked, and she let it, because the floor was honest, because there were only 2 people in that room, and one of them was dying, and the other one was me, and I never told it. Not my mother, not the stone. The stone took the scene, the corridor, the chair, but the squeeze was under the blanket. It was ours. Not you, not the amphitheater, not one soul on 2 worlds. There was nothing to cold read. There is no record. Either something stood inside that room 11 years ago, close enough to feel a dying man's hand, or your father, Doromir said quietly, is in the water. And I don't know which one is worse. She said it fast, before it could refuse to be said. That's the part I can't chart. If it's a trap, it's the cruelest instrument ever aimed at me, and I want to burn the fen. And if it's true, her breath went ragged. 12 years of sealed drawers opening down a corridor. If it's true, Doromir, then he's been down there, my dad, in the dark, under the ice, kept, like the water keeps everything, for 11 years, while I filed him under closed, and the only thing I have ever wanted since I was 23 is 9 more minutes, and something at the bottom of 1100 steps is holding a cup full of them and saying, come down. The room held it with her. It was Valis, at last, from the doorway, who said the flat, load-bearing thing. Healer. In the forest, the first hour, you told 12 drawn bows you were not their enemy, and it was true, and it saved you. So I will pay the debt in kind and tell you the true thing now, while your hands are still doing that. He nodded at her thumb, 3 and then 1, and she still did. Whether it is your father or a lure wearing him, both roads end at the same step. You are always going down that stair. The cup is there. The mission is there. The thing that authors the Deep King's dreams is there. The only question the message settles is what you will be carrying when you descend. So grieve tonight and count your own heart for once, and let the company hold the watch. The differential, he said, and the word in his flat soldier's voice undid her completely, can wait for morning. If you have ever been given permission to fall apart by the last person you expected, you know that it works precisely because they are the last person you expected. She slept, eventually, on the floor, against a king's shoulder, to the sound of water. Morning brought the war table, and the war table brought the analysis, and the analysis was Doromir's, and it was surgical, and it was the hardest gift he ever gave her. I stayed up with the Lawmaster's seedstone and the record of the amphitheater, he said, not looking at her, because looking at her would have stopped him, and he knew it, and she knew he knew it, and she loved him for the not looking with a fierceness that startled her. The memory of your father's death as the stone drank it from you. Lena, the fire door at the corridor's end, the propped one where the hole stood at parade rest. I measured the sight line. He set the seedstone down. It saw the bed. 11 years ago, whatever stood sentry in that corridor had direct line of sight to your father's right hand. A witness, not a ghost, could have harvested the pattern. The squeeze was observable. That is the case for the trap, and I will not soften it. Everything the thing below has shown us can, in principle, be surveillance. The pattern. The 9 minutes. A thing that watched the corridor, watched the specialist arrive late. Even my girl, a dying man mouths words, a watcher reads lips. The entire miracle reduces, if we are ruthless, to 1 century with a sight line and 11 years of patience. The war table was silent. Lena sat very still, and the clinical half of her, the half that had written chapters, nodded along, vindicated and bereaved with every sentence. And now the case against the trap, Doromir said, and turned the seedstone over, which no one at this table will want to hear, least of all me. The lamp in the window was mine. He looked up at last, Sarethiel's exact image at the pool on our last night on the mountain. You were already lit, like a lamp left burning in a window by someone who expected to come back. She said she did not light you. She said to ask the river who leaves lamps. Lena, Sarethiel spoke those words to you alone, at a sealed pool on a warded mountain, and the prophet cannot be surveilled by anything we know of. She lives in the crack between the worlds, and 1100 steps down a stair in a different nation. A thing in the dark answers her image back, word for word, and signs it. His voice did the thing his fathers had done, paid a toll, as your father. Either the two oldest mysteries on this board are colluding, or they are describing the same true thing from two sides. And there is a third possibility, which I like least of all, that the sentry at the fire door, the lamp in the window, and the voice in the water are all one system. And it has been tending you, Lena, curating you, since before Sarethiel ever went looking. Not the enemy's key, something else's, investment. Then we go down, Lena said, and audit it. We, said Skalvar Emberoth, heavily, from the head of the table, is the word this council now has to fight about. Except the fight never happened, because Vade moved first, and a boy died. He was 19, an apprentice salt cutter of the 9th Deep Terrace, and his name, the Undervault would not stop saying his name for a season, was Kel. He came to the Lampfather's gallery at the shift bell of deep night, with 30 ember bound around him for courage, and Vade's theology in him for fire. The cup was home, the cup was right there, one step down, and the law that forbade the stair was the timidity of kings, and whoever bore the cup up into the world would midwife the age of the deathless. The wardens on the gallery saw the torches too late. Kel reached the stairhead at a run, and 30 voices sang him on, and he went down onto the first step and took the golden cup in both his young hands. He did not scream. That was the detail the warden's report kept returning to, like a tongue to a broken tooth. He lifted the cup and turned back to the light with his face full of triumph, and the black water did not tilt. The cup rose, the disk of night stayed level, stayed parallel to something that was not the floor. And Kel of the 9th Terrace looked down into it, once, the way you look when the water shows you something, and his triumph went somewhere else, somewhere very far, and he stepped, every warden swore it, unforced, unslipping, deliberate, down, onto the second step, and the third. Walking down into the dark, with the cup level in his hands, and his face still tilted toward whatever it had shown him, while 30 torches screamed his name from the top of a stair, none of them dared follow. The cup was back on the topmost step by morning, full, level, not one drop spilled. Of Kel, the Stair of Silence kept its name. What Vade did with the boy's death was the education for Lena in what the Undervault was actually fighting. He wept for Kel, publicly, beautifully, before noon on the 9th Terrace with 4,000 mourners. He accepted, humbly, the Deep King's furious prescription of the Emberbound, and dissolved the Brotherhood with his own proclamation, and in the same breath founded its funeral, a remembrance, leaderless, blameless, just grief, grief that gathered on the terraces each shift bell in growing thousands, asking only the question Vade had taught it to ask, reasonably, brokenly, over and over. Why does the healer from another world get called down to the cup our own boy died for touching? Why does the deep speak to strangers and drown our sons? He never once said the elves had brought a curse. He never had to. Under the ice, Lena thought, watching the remembrance swell from the anvil's balcony, Morvath would have loved this man. He had discovered how to weaponize mourning, and he hadn't even needed a red crystal to do it. He is turning my city against the descent, Skalvar said, coal-eyed, exhausted. Every shift bell, the question grows. If the healer goes down now, half the terraces call it theft of a dwarven mystery. If she does not go, the boy died for a step she was too proud to take. He has built a door that closes on us whichever way it swings. It was into that arithmetic, at the worst shift bell of the worst day, that the old woman of the bridge came to the anvil, the mother of Bram and Otter, whose dead lamp the king of the elves had carried on his belt through every hour under the ice since the bridgestones, exactly as sworn. She was admitted because no warden in the Undervault was going to be the one who refused her, and she stumped into the war chamber, looked around at 2 kings and a healer and the wreckage of the hour, and addressed herself to Doramir as if the rest were furniture. You still carry it? I said I would, mother, until it burns again. Kel's mother is my sister's daughter, the old woman said, flat as fen ice. I sat with her through the dark bell. And I have listened to the Saltmaster weep on the 9th terrace, and I knew his father, and his father could weep on demand as well. It is a guild skill down there. The ancient eyes came around to Lena and measured her the way they had measured a king. They are saying on the terraces that the deep drowned our boy and now sends for the stranger. So I have come to say the other thing, the one nobody profits from saying. My sons died on the open fen 30 years ago because the world's peoples would not walk into the dark together. Every folk hoarding its own relic, its own grief, its own stare. I have hated the elves 30 years for it, and it kept me warm, and it relit nothing. She reached into her shawl and set on the war table, beside the maps, a second miner's lamp. Old, dented, its little door open. Its wick was new. Otters, she said. Brams is on the elf's belt. When you go down those stairs tomorrow, healer, take my other son with you. And if there is any mercy in the water, come up with a light. If you have ever watched a single ordinary person outvote a demagogue by walking into a room, you know the war table was silent a long time, and that the silence was the sound of a city's verdict quietly changing hands. Then we don't use his door, Lena said. She had spent the whole shift bell before at the anvil's balcony rail, watching the torches of the remembrance, doing the things she did, reading the city like a body, the grief moving through the terraces in waves, real grief, hijacked grief, and under her exhaustion and her own cracked open heart, the diagnosis had finally, coldly, assembled itself. Now, with a new wicked lamp on the war table, lending her its verdict, she delivered it. Kel didn't die because he touched the cup. Kel died because he looked into it wanting what Vade taught him to want, and the water showed him, and he followed. Deepfather told us the terms in front of 10,000 witnesses, and we all heard prophecy instead of protocol. It will not deal with kings, it deals with the one who counts. It's not a treasure down there, and it's not a god handing out audiences. It's a triage system, and it has been sorting this world's souls by what they carry for longer than the holds have kept ledgers. She turned from the rail, and the company saw the healer assemble over the grief-like armor over a wound, and Skalvar Emberoth saw, for the first time, the thing his father had walked 11 years into the dark to summon. So we answer Vade in the only language that beats a beautiful mourner. Witness, no secret descent, no stolen mystery. Tomorrow, at the shift bell, in front of the whole remembrance and every lamp in the undervault, I go down the Stair of Silence exactly as your father went, Deep King, openly. Carrying nothing but what I've always carried. Her hand rose to the stethoscope and the drum bead beside it. And your city watches the deep receive the counting hands it asked for, or watches it take me like it took Kel. Either way, the terraces get the truth instead of Vade's question. That's the offer. I'm told the dwarves respect a debt stated plainly. This one will be repaid. The silence at the balcony held a long time. My father said you would come, Skalvar said at last, roughly. He never said you would outdwarf us. That evening, before the last bell, the seed stone at Lena's throat woke warm. The lawmaster's relay, threaded moonset by moonset from a shore house on a mountain half a world behind them, and the company gathered in the guest delvings to hear Cantalar's whisper, carried in the remembrancer's dry, precise transmission voice. The mountain held. Kale stewarded well. The parade lie was being fed on schedule, and fed lavishly. The loremasters had leaked drawings of ceremonial barges, of all things, and Morvath's moonset inquiries had begun to acquire what Nereveth described, with 30 years of connoisseurship, as the first genuine irritation I have ever heard in him. He believes he is watching elven vanity delay his design, and it is costing him patience he did not budget. Then the dry voice changed register. 2 matters more, healer, and the lady bids me give them exactly. First, at the last moonset, among his questions, he asked one that has never come before. He asked whether the healer had dreamed yet. Not of what, only whether. The lady answered that her window did not reach dreams, and he accepted it and moved on, too smoothly. Weigh that as you will. A pause in the warm stone, the length of a held breath, half a world long. Second, the white flowers in the winter garden have bloomed out of season, all of them. On the night, by our best reckoning, that your deep bells rang. The gardeners have no explanation. The lady of the southern shores says only this, and made me swear the wording. Tell the healer that the last time the world's calendars started agreeing with each other, someone was tuning them. Watch the water, and come home. The relay faded. The company sat with it, with the image of Lyriel's grief flowers opening in the dark of another country at the hour a cup crossed the 90th step. And it was Phelan, in the end, who said the thing everyone was circling in the small voice of a boy soldier a very long way under the ice. Everything is on the same clock now, isn't it? Us, the enemy, the deep, the flowers, her world's hospital. He glanced at Lena, and at the stethoscope, and at the drumbeat beside it, all of it, keeping the same count, like the whole board is. One patient, Lena finished quietly. Yes, I know. I've been hearing the pulse for a while. Doramir came to her rooms at the last bell before the descent, and she knew before he spoke, from the set of him, that they were about to have the fight they had been not having since a gallery 10,000 strong had watched her knees give. The terms, he said. Deep Father's terms. It will receive the one who counts, and the rest of it, Lena. Say the rest of it. And what she cannot put down. She held his eyes. The company's been debating it for a day. Ithreni thinks it means the stethoscope. Phelan voted for grief and got very quiet after. Byllis thinks it's the drum bead, and Vilis is wrong and knows he's wrong and voted for the bead so he wouldn't have to say what he actually thinks. And what does the healer think it means? The healer, Lena said, has been refusing to chart it because the healer cannot put you down, Doramir, and the healer has watched this world take a father from every single person she loves, and the thought of leading you down into the thing at the bottom of the world. Her voice held. She had rebuilt the holding overnight on a stone floor against his shoulder. The thought has a differential too, and every branch of it ends with me carrying you back up those 1100 steps or not coming up at all. Good, said the king of the Kant Peaks. Then we understand each other perfectly. He crossed the room and took her face in both hands, gently, the way he had taken a dead lamp, like the thing that outweighed his crown. You told my father you buy time. He told me, at the end, in the spent hour, with you holding his other hand, that the steering is the life. I am not asking to guard you down that stair, Lena. I have watched you for a season and a world. You are not a thing that gets guarded. I am telling you the terms, as they are actually written, the one who counts, and what she cannot put down. It did not say what she chooses to bring. The dawn on a mountain smile, wrecked and certain. It has been watching you longer than any of us. It already knows I'm coming. And far below them both, at the lip of the dark, on the topmost step of the Stair of Silence, the black disk of the cup, level, patient, 11 years unspilled, rippled, once. Section 5. The undervault put out its fires for her. That was the honor the Deep King decreed for the descent, the honor reserved, in 10,000 years of ledgers, for exactly one prior occasion, and Skalvar Emberoth would not say what it had been. And so when Lena Marlowe walked down through the terraces at the shift bell, the city that never darkened had banked every forge, dimmed every coal vein, and lit, in their place, the lamps. All of them. Hand lamps and bridge lamps, ancestral lamps and children's first lamps, hundreds of thousands of small flames terraced up into the great blue dark of the cavern, so that the undervault became for 1 hour what it had perhaps always secretly been, not a city at all, but a held constellation. A sky the dwarves had built underground because the ice had taken the real one. She walked down through it with the company at her back and Otter's lamp in her hand, and the terraces did not cheer and did not drum. They did the third thing, the thing nobody had taught them, that began somewhere on the 9th deep terrace of all places and ran through the crowds along her route like current through the mountain's veins. As she passed, each dwarf raised their lamp to the level of their own heart and held it there and said nothing at all. 10,000 lights, lifted to 10,000 chests, the count rendered in fire. If you have ever walked through a crowd that has decided, silently and all at once, to trust you with something it cannot say aloud, then you know why Lena Marlowe, who had held her composure through kings' deaths and God's messages, wept the whole last terrace and made no attempt to hide it, and why the city loved her the more for the not hiding. At the stairhead, the goodbyes were short because everything true had already been said in smaller rooms. Terenil's drumbeat had acquired a companion overnight. A dwarf child had pushed through the lamp lines on the last terrace, pursued by a mortified father, and pressed into Lena's free hand a bead of her own, salt crystal, clumsily drilled, threaded on a bootlace. For the Count, the child had said, in careful rehearsed trade tongue, chin at an angle Lena recognized across species and worlds, where we can't hear it. So the healer of two worlds went down to meet the oldest living thing, wearing a stethoscope, a mountain's drum, and the undervault's salt, and if any instrument on either side of the dark could have measured what that weighed against what it armored, no ledger would have believed the ratio. Ithran pressed a fresh satchel on her and said, colleague to colleague, whatever is down there, it is still a patient or it is still a threat, and you know the protocols for both. Countrywoman. Phelan saluted, botched it on purpose to make her laugh, and succeeded, damn him. Bayless looked at her a long moment, at the lamp, at the stethoscope, at the beads, taking inventory the way he took it before a fight, and said only, come up. An order from a captain to the one person on two worlds he took orders from. Scalvar Emberoth stood at the pillars of the inscription with his father's serene, inhabited body beside him, and the Deep King's farewell was a dwarf's. He stated the debt. Whatever you find, healer, my father's soul, my people's cup, or the thing that authors all our dreams, the Undervault's roads are yours until the ice melts. It is written in the ledgers as of this bell. That is not sentiment, it is collateral. A pause, and the coal eyes went, briefly, to the still black disk waiting on the topmost step. And if you meet my father down there, the one behind the water, tell him the lamps never once went out. Then it was the stairhead, and the two pillars, and the old cold words, below this step, the mountain owes you nothing, and Doromir beside her, with Bram's lamp on his belt, and the tear pulsing quick against his throat, and Deepfather already 3 steps down, waiting, glad and terrible, with the cup once more in his level hands. It lends me the steps, he said, by way of everything. Stay behind my light, touch nothing the dark offers you. And when the water begins to keep things for you, and it will, Green Eyes, you above all, remember that a kept thing is a shown thing. It is not asking you to stay. What is it asking? Deepfather smiled with a dead king's mouth and turned and began to descend. It is asking you to read the chart. The last lamp of the world hung at the 200th step, a warden's lantern in a niche, faithfully filled for 11 years against this exact night, and below it, the dark began. Lena had known dark in two worlds, power cuts in windowless corridors, moonless watches on the eastern road. This was neither. This dark had texture. It did not press in against their 3 small lights. It received them the way still water receives a dropped stone, parting exactly enough, closing exactly behind, and within 50 steps the sound of the river below had risen from a whisper to a presence, broad and patient and unmistakably aware, and within 100 the keeping began. Doromir's came first. He stopped mid-step, so suddenly she walked into his back, and she felt him go rigid, and then she heard it too, threading up out of the dark below them, clear as the canal outside her window, a girl's laugh, young, bright, helplessly infectious, echoing off stone as if from just around a turning that did not exist, and then, woven through it, a man's voice, warm, accented, patiently reading aloud, stumbling on a word, and the girl's laugh again, correcting him, and the man laughing too, trying the word again, getting it wrong again, on purpose this time. Lyriel, Doromir said. His voice had gone somewhere very young. Teaching him to read. I used to sit on the stair outside her solar and listen. I never told anyone that. I have never told anyone. A kept thing is a shown thing, said Deepfather, ahead, without turning, gentle as the fen. The water was in the pitcher on her table, Prince, in the rain against her window. In the 2 of them, 9 parts in 10. Where do you imagine everything went? He took another step. It keeps. It has always kept. Walk on. There is more of her below, and it is not why we have come, and it will still be here. That is the mercy of it, King of Elves, though it will take you some years to call it that. They walked on. The laugh receded, not fading, filed, Lena thought, reshelved with a librarian's care, and Doromir walked the next 100 steps with his hand white-knuckled on Bram's dead lamp and his face wet in the lantern light and his spine perfectly straight, and Lena put her hand between his shoulders and left it there. And neither of them said anything, because the dark was saying everything. Her own keeping began at the 400th step, and it was not what she had braced for. She had braced for the corridor, for the white room, the plastic chair, the 9 minutes. The deep had already proven it held them, and she had descended armored against the replay. Instead, out of the received dark came small things, the squeak of sneakers on a gymnasium floor, and her father's whistle. 2 notes, their finding whistle, from crowded places, Marco without words. The specific rattle hum of his workshop table saw winding down, and his voice over it. Hand me the small square, my girl. No, yes, good eye. Rain on a car roof. Wipers. A radio catching the end of a song he liked. His palm drumming it out of rhythm on the wheel. Gloriously, unrepentantly, out of rhythm. It's not showing me his death, she heard herself say, wondering, wrecked, to no one, to the dark, to the chart. Everyone shows me his death. My whole memory shows me his death. 12 years. The corridor eats everything. It's the weight. The stone said, memory goes where the weight is. Stones are young, said Deep Father, descending, glad and terrible. Stones keep weight. The water is old. Green eyes. The water keeps worth. And Lena Marlowe walked down 400 more steps through the sound of her father alive. The whistle, the saw, the drumming palm, the good eye, my girl, and understood, somewhere past the 800th step, with her face soaked and her count steady, that something at the bottom of the world had just done in 1 hour what 12 years, 2 universes, and 1 memory stone had never managed. It had given her back the before, not the wound, the man. Whatever waited below, she thought, it had just introduced itself, and it had bedside manner. They rested at the 1000th step, because even appointments with the oldest living thing must negotiate with human knees, and it was there, sharing water and trail bread on a landing worn smooth by 10 millennia of exactly this pause, that Lena asked Deep Father the question the whole descent had been assembling. Kel, she said. The boy. He looked into the cup and walked down, and the stair kept his name. And your warden's oaths broke against Harrick's rank, but no dwarf walks past the stair. 10,000 years of no dwarf. What does it do to them, the ones it doesn't call? What is the stair actually sorting? Deep Father considered her across the lantern light, the cup level on his knees, and the 2 voices braided slow. You have seen sorting rooms, green eyes, the white ones, with the gurneys. What is the first cruelty of triage? She knew it the way she knew her own pulse. That it isn't about who's most beloved, it's about who can be helped, and what you have, and when. So with the stair, the shining rose, gentle. The water does not take the worthy and refuse the wicked. It is not a priest. It receives what it can hold without harm, to the held and to the keeping. The boy Kel came down carrying want. Not evil, want, with Vade's shape pressed into it, a hunger for the cup to be what the cup is not. The water showed him truly what he carried at the first step in the black glass, and what he carried, once seen, could not put itself down, and so it walked him gently to where wanting rests. The dead king's face was grave. It grieves him, you should know. It grieves everyone it must keep early. It has asked me to tell his mother's kin, when this is done, that he is not in the dark. Nothing it keeps is in the dark. That is rather the point of it. And Harrick? Doramir asked quietly. What did the Deep King carry, that it called him down and lends him back? Ledgers, said Deep Father, and the gravel voice under the river was, for a moment, wholly and dryly dwarf. 90 years of stewardship, and not one line of want in the whole account. The water needed hands that could hold a cup for 11 years, without once wondering what was in it for the hands. A pause. It chooses its instruments the way you choose yours, healer. Clean ones. The 90th step from the bottom, when they reached it, was marked. Not by masons, by where, a smooth hollow in the stone lip where, once a generation across 10,000 years, someone had stopped, and turned, and stood. Deep Father halted on it without being asked, and for the space of 3 breaths the shining receded, and Harrick Emberoth looked back up the way they had come, at the dark, at the 1100 steps, at the world. This is where it let me hear my son's voice one last time before the water, he said. One voice, gravel alone. Every descent, the same mercy, the same step. It is very old and very strange, and it has never once skipped the kindnesses. Whatever else you conclude at the shore, green eyes, enter that in the chart. 1100 steps above, at that hour, the undervault kept its vigil of lamps, and on the 9th deep terrace, in the Salt Guild's counting room, Master Vade sat alone before a shallow basin of brine, watching its surface with the patience of a man at a window. He had wept beautifully at the stairhead with everyone else. He had raised his lamp to his heart, and then he had come home and locked the counting room and taken from beneath the floor stone a thing no saltmaster's inventory carried, a sliver of crystal, thumb length, that lit the brine from below when he set it in the basin, lit it deep and pulsing and red. "She has gone down," he said to the water, softly, in the tone of a man reporting to his employer. "Both of them. The king wears the elf stone still. The city watches the stairhead and sees nothing else." A pause. The red light pulsed, question-shaped. "No, no dreaming yet that my ears have bought. But master, the deep has never made appointments before. Whatever wakes down there wakes for her." The red pulse came again, slower, and Vade's open, delighted face arranged itself around the answer like a hand around a coin. "Of course, the remembrance will be ready. Grief," said the guildmaster of salt, gently, to the red light in the water, "keeps better than meat down here. You taught me that." The Stair of Silence ended at step 1100 without ceremony, exactly as it had begun, and the world opened. They came out of the stair-foot arch onto a shore. There was no other word, though every word was insufficient, a strand of pale sand and smoothed black stone, sloping down out of the archlight into a body of water that had no far side, no near horizon, no scale the eye could hold, a sea, under the world, stretching away beneath a ceiling lost in height, and it was not dark. That was the thing that took Lena's knees loose. The whole vast water glowed, faintly, patiently, from below, from within, the exact glow she had seen through 40 feet of fen ice at the 12th noon. The light the undervault's ceiling had been filtering all along, and its surface lay still as the cup's black disk from shore to invisible shore, except where, far out, slow currents moved beneath like thoughts, trailing veins of deeper light. The shore itself bore witness to 10,000 years of appointments. Set along the strand at long intervals above the waterline stood the cups, dozens of them. Then, as the eye adjusted, hundreds, receding down the glowing dark of the coast, vessels of every age and every craft, gold and horn and fired clay, and shapes belonging to no race the lawmasters had ever catalogued, each one upright, each one level, each one full to the brim with still black water. "It has had 10,000 years of kings," said a memory of two braided voices at the top of 1100 steps. "It keeps their cups." Lena looked down the endless shelf of them. Every prior appointment, every prior age, every soul the water had received and retained, decanted and waiting, and the healer in her filed the strand under the only heading that fit, with the hair rising on her arms as she filed it. Not a shore, a ward. The sound of the river filled everything, broad and calm, and there was no river. The sea did not move. The sound, Lena understood at last, standing on the shore of it, was not water flowing. It was the sea remembering rivers, all of them, every river it had ever been. The Sareth, Doromir breathed beside her. The tear at his throat had gone incandescent, pulsing hard, and he laid his hand over it like a man calming a bird. The holy river, the maps, the songs, 10,000 years of pilgrimage. Lena, the Sareth runs above this. Every river runs above this. It is not a river. It is where the rivers come from, she finished, and where everything they carry goes. The healer in her was assembling it with a kind of vertigo. The fen's warm seams, the canals of the undervault, the braided falls of Canthalar, the pool where a prophet had answered from between the worlds, the rain on a car roof in another universe. One body, one patient, the word the maps had needed all along and never dared. Not a water, the water. Deepfather walked past them down the strand, set the golden cup on a flat black stone at the very edge, where its disk of night at last matched its parent, level to level, dark to glowing dark, and turned, and his two braided voices had never sounded more like a door opening. "It has been called 10,000 names in 10,000 years, and it has answered to none of them, because names are what it keeps, not what it is. The elves sing to its smallest finger and call the finger holy. The dwarves ledger its sweat and call the sweat wealth. The enemy, the shining rose, and for the first time since the gallery, something in it was not glad. The enemy cut his wound into its body, healer, and called the wound a door. 11 years ago it reached the end of a very long patience and began to make appointments." He stepped aside, off the strand, out of the space between Lena and the water, with the deliberate courtesy of an orderly leaving a room. Yours has arrived. It will keep the king and me at the shore. It asks. The ghost of Harrick Emberoth smiled. It asks that you walk down to the water alone, Green Eyes, exactly the way you walk into every room where the hour is waiting. It has watched you do it 1,000 times. It would like, just once, to be the patient. Lena looked at Doromir. Doromir looked at her. The tear blazing under his hand, Bram's lamp and 1,100 steps and everything neither of them said. And then he did the hardest and most kingly thing in his 90 years. He stepped back and gave the hour to the world. She walked down the pale sand alone, past the last of the black stones, past a cup of grey horn, so old its metal bands had gone to green lace, full and level and patient as all the rest. At the edge, where the glowing dark lapped without moving, she stopped, healer's distance, 1 pace from the bed, and became aware that her hands had gone, entirely without permission, to their oldest stations, right thumb to left palm, 3, and then 1, and behind her, far up the strand, the tier of the first tree was blazing like a second shore lamp against Doromir's white-knuckled hand, and the vast glowing stillness before her was no longer entirely still. Something under the surface, far out where the currents trailed their veins of light, had turned toward her with the frictionless, unhurried quickness of a thing that did not negotiate with weight. Then she did what she did at every bedside on 2 worlds. She announced herself. "My name is Lena Marlowe," she said to the oldest living thing. "I'm a doctor. I understand you've been waiting to see me." And the sea rose, not a wave, a shape. Water lifting from the still surface 3 paces out, unhurried, gathering itself upward, the way smoke gathers in reverse, glowing from within, drawing height and breadth, and then detail. Shoulders first, a carpenter's shoulders, then the set of a head she knew from 10,000 photographs and one irreplaceable life, then hands, big, careful, workshop-scarred, one of them already lifting, palm out, in the old wave from crowded places, and then the face, laugh lines and all, rendered in luminous water down to the crooked eyebrow. "Good eye, my girl." And the shape of her father looked down at her from the surface of the world's memory, and the sea spoke, and it did not use 2 voices, or 10,000. It used his. "Hello, my girl," said the water. "Look how you turned out. Come here. We've got 9 minutes, and I've been saving them for 11 years. Section 6. She did not walk to him. She ran. 12 years of protocol, 2 worlds of composure, 1,100 steps of clinical discipline. All of it stayed behind on the pale sand like a coat shrugged off at a door, and Lena Marlowe ran the last 3 paces into the shallows of the oldest living thing and into the arms of the shape it had made of her father, and the arms held. That was the impossible thing, the thing she would never afterward be able to explain to the war table or the ledgers or herself. The water held her the way he had held her, exactly. The grip and the warmth and the workshop smell of him rendered somehow in luminous depth, and his laugh rumbled against her ear the way it had rumbled when she was 6 and the world was only 1 world. "There she is," said her father. "There's my girl. All right now, I've got you." She was crying the way she had not cried at 23, because at 23 she had been counting, and the count had eaten the crying, and some bills come due with 11 years of interest. He let her. Of course he let her. He had always let her, and rushed nothing, and when she finally pulled back to arm's length to look at him, laugh lines, crooked eyebrow, the rendered water of him glowing faintly from within, like the whole patient sea. His face was doing what it had done at every scraped knee and every heartbreak of her first 23 years, hurting for her hurt, and refusing to look away from it. "You got old," he said, wonderingly, delighted. "Look at you, 34. You've got my mother's frown lines. She'd be furious. She always said they'd skip a generation." The luminous hand came up and pressed, feather light, between her eyebrows, smoothing the line the way he had when she was small and worried about spelling tests. "Still keeping the whole world's appointments, I see. Still nobody keeping yours. Dad." Her voice came out 23 years old. "Dad, is it you? I'm a doctor. I need to know what the differential." "I know you do." He said it gently and sat down, sat in the shallows, water folding into the shape of a man sitting the way he'd sat on the workshop floor, patting the luminous sand beside him, and she sat, and the sea held them both. "So let's do it properly. You ask, I'll answer what I am and flag what I'm not. Deal? The crooked eyebrow. You get 9 minutes, my girl. I'm told you know how to spend those better than anyone alive. If you have ever rehearsed a conversation for 11 years, every version, every opening line, every impossible reply, you know that when the door actually opens, every rehearsal burns off at once, and what is left is only the true questions in their true order. Are you him? Lena asked. Or are you it, wearing him, kindly, the way it wears Herrick? Both, neither, closest true thing. He squinted out at the glowing horizonless water, assembling it, and even the assembling was him, the way he'd squinted at warped lumber. I'm what he was, kept. When I died, Lena, the part of me that was just machinery stopped, same as it stops for everyone, and the part that was worth something, the part that whistled you out of crowds, the part that was proud of you, the part that squeezed, that part, the water kept. Not trapped, not waiting in the dark, don't you dare spend one more night on that. Kept, whole, and still, and this is the part your differential's going to fight, so hear it from my mouth, content. The water isn't a jar, sweetheart. It's more like the workshop squint. You know how a song's still real when nobody's singing it. I'm the song. Right now, for 9 minutes, the sea is singing me. After, I go back to being kept. And being kept, her father said, with the whole simple weight of him, is fine, Lena. It's better than fine. Cross that one off the chart tonight. You died in my world, the clinical voice, cracking down its length. There's a wound between the universes. There's a monster feeding it. Everyone talks about crossings. Dad, how are you here? Because here is the part everyone above the stairs has wrong. He leaned back on luminous hands. 2 worlds, they say. 2 rooms, and a wall, and a hole cut in the wall. That's your monster's whole architecture. That's how he thinks. Walls and doors and keys. But sweetheart, what do 2 rooms in the same house stand on? He knocked gently on the glowing shallows between them. Same foundation, same water table. Your world, this world. 2 shores, one deep. It doesn't flow between the worlds because it doesn't need to flow. It's already under both of them, always was. Every river on both sides comes up out of it and lays back down into it. Your hospital's pipes, girl. The rain on the car roof. 9 parts in 10 of everybody. There was never one drop of anywhere that wasn't already here. Lena sat very still on the shore of the foundation of 2 universes and felt the whole map of everything quietly rotate 90 degrees. The lamp, she whispered. Sareth said I was already lit. A lamp left burning in a window by someone who expected to come back. She said to ask the river who leaves lamps. Deep Father said, you said, the lamp in the window was mine. Her father was quiet a moment, and when he spoke, it was the voice from the end of long drives, the serious one, the one that had taught her the few things he'd insisted on teaching. When the machinery stopped, the water kept what I was worth, and most of what I was worth, Lena, the honest ledger of it, was you, loving you, being proud of you, hoping you like a house on fire. That doesn't dissolve, kept things don't dissolve, but it wouldn't settle either. It stayed, attached, to you, burning. The water says it's rare, not unheard of, but rare, a keeping that won't lie down, a light that stays on a living person. The crooked eyebrow, wet now, still crooked. You've been walking around 2 universes for 11 years, my girl, wearing your old man's love like a lamp in your chest, visible to everything old enough or deep enough to see by that kind of light. The witch between the worlds didn't choose you. She found you, followed the light through the dark like anyone lost would, and then she told herself she'd chosen. And the sentry at my door, the night I died, his hand found hers, luminous and warm and workshop rough. That was the waters, not watching you, sweetheart, attending, the way it attends every great ending. It just noticed that night that one of its endings wouldn't finish, that a light had walked out of the room still burning. It's been keeping half an eye on its strange little lamp ever since, 11 years, and when the monster's wound got bad enough that the deep needed hands, he squeezed 3, and then 1, and this time it was real. This time she felt it in her whole life. It already knew exactly which light to send for.
The 9 minutes did what 9 minutes do, but the sea was courteous with them. She would swear afterward that it stretched the seams, and there was time still, for the smaller ledger, for him to demand her life and get it, the residency and the empty apartment and the Sunday calls, receiving the sad parts without flinching and the proud parts without surprise. Of course you did. I've been getting the highlights. The water keeps everything. I've seen the amphitheater. I wept for a week of kept time. There was time for her mother. She calls me every Sunday, Lena said. And we talk about everything on 2 continents except you. 11 years, Dad. We built a whole language out of not saying it. She thinks it protects me. I think it protects her. The water can keep that too, I suppose. 2 women on 1 phone line, keeping a silence in perfect unison. Your mother, her father said, and the rendered face did the thing it had always done at the mention of her, going soft and exasperated at once. 40 years of marriage in one expression, held my hand for the last 9 minutes with a grip like a bench vice, and told me, these were the words, don't you dare make this the saddest thing that ever happened to her. Be the best thing first for as long as she needs. And then I died, and she looked across the bed at you counting, and she has spent 11 years trying to figure out how to obey me, a dead man's instruction she never heard me given. He shook his head slowly. You didn't build that silence, sweetheart. She did, brick by brick, Sunday by Sunday, because she thinks if she cries on that phone even once, she becomes the saddest thing, and takes my place, and you lose us both. 2 stubborn women guarding each other off a cliff. The crooked eyebrow came up, wet and stern. So here is your message to carry home. Doctor's orders from the foundation of 2 worlds. When you next hear her voice, and you will, the clock at home is holding its breath, the water gives you its word on that, you say, Dad says the garden fence still isn't finished and he watched you pay the man too much. She'll know, it's ours, it means... His voice went for one moment, entirely to pieces, and reassembled. It means I see you, and it's safe to be sad now. 11 years, Lena. Tell her the shift is over, both of yours. Lena wrote it into herself the way she wrote allergies and blood types, indelibly. And there was time for him to look up the strand at the tall, silver-haired figure standing white-knuckled at the shore lamp's edge, and say, with the paternal menace of every world's every father, that the elf? Walk him down here. I've got 900 years of opinions and 9 minutes. I'll summarize. And time, when she laughed and refused, for his face to gentle, and for him to say the true version. He watched you the whole way down that stair, my girl. Not like you'd break, like you're the count, like the whole dark keeps time by you. That's the one. That was always going to be the one. And there was time at the last for the water to rise gently through him, not displacing, joining the 2 registers braiding the way Deepfather's voice is braided, and for the sea itself to speak to her at last, through the mouth it knew she could bear to hear it from, about the wound, and the war, and why a healer. The 5 holy things, Lena. Her father's voice, and under it the sound of every river. Your quest, the relics, the ritual at the Sareth. Everyone above has the shape of it and nobody has the sense of it, because they all inherited the instructions and lost the diagnosis. So here it is, from the patient's own mouth. At the beginning, the true beginning, before the races had names for themselves, the deep gave each people a droplet of itself. Kept water, crystallized, 5 small vessels of everything it is, not treasures, not keys, grafts, sweetheart, living tissue, banked against a wound it was old enough to know would someday come. The elves hung theirs on a tree and called it a tear. They were nearly right. The dwarves cupped theirs. The orcs bit down on theirs and never let go, bless them. The tall folk grew a grove around theirs. And the 5th? The braided voice tightened. The 5th was given to the people who lived nearest the deep places, who were its keepers and its priests, long before they wore black, long before they were called Torima. Morvath's crystal, Lena, the red one, the bright one, the one that keeps screams, that is the 5th graft, infected. He didn't steal a relic, he is what became of the surgeons. The shallows had gone very cold, or she had. The wound he cut feeds on me, said the sea plainly through her father's mouth. Every year it drinks, I keep less well. There are places in me now, reaches, arms, old deep roads of myself, where the keeping has gone wrong. Where kept things are not still, and not content, and not in the light. Your deep king dreams it, the nights the cup pours empty, the river that stands up and is not water. That is not prophecy, my girl, that is fever. He has been dreaming my infection for 11 years because I have been showing it to him, showing the only surface that would listen. And the infected reach is rising, Lena. It pools below the country your maps call the hollow deep, and it has learned to want, the way wounds learn, and 11 years ago it crossed a threshold that ended my patience. It began to keep things of its own. The travelers, Lena whispered. The lanterns that go down and don't come up, the quick and the found. Now you have the chart. A pause, and she used the pause the way she used every pause at every bedside, for the questions that hurt. The writing. The frost alphabet, on Sarathiel's arms, in Erling's chest, on Skalvar's arm, in the ash on a pillow in my own hospital. Whose script is it? Because it's on your instruments and his, and that has been keeping me awake across 2 universes. Mine, said the sea simply, and her father's face carried the grief of it. The oldest script there is, the marks the keeping makes. Every kept thing is written somewhere in me, in that hand. It is not a language, sweetheart. It is scar tissue that means something. The Terima were my keepers once. My priests, my surgeons, the people of the deep places. I taught their forebears to read the keeping, so that the dead of every race could be attended rightly. And when Morvath's generation fell, when they learned that what can be read can be extracted, that keeping could be bottled, that a scream could be crystallized and worn like jewelry, they took my own script down into the ash with them. Every red crystal in that army is a word of mine, my girl, cut out of me and taught to mean torment. When his frost writes in a king's chest, he is forging my handwriting. That is why the mountain's wisest could never tell my dreams from his weapons. The braided voice went low and very old. You asked once at a pool whether to trust your own choosing. Here it settled. The enemy is not my opposite healer, he is my malpractice, and no one hates a corrupted surgeon like the body that trained him. So here the terms, healer, the ones I sent a good king down 1100 steps to hold level for 11 years. The cup is yours, the dwarves' graft, first of the 5, filled and ready. I will set it in your hands myself, and the whole undervault will see the deep give, and the saltmaster's beautiful morning will die in his mouth. But grafts are not carried into surgery through an infected field, Lena. You know this. Before the cup goes up into the world, before I dare let one drop of my whole self travel toward that wound, the reach below the hollow deep must be cut. Debrided, healed or severed, I no longer know which is possible, and it frightens me, and I am not accustomed to fright. A pause, and the 2 registers of the voice pressed close, and it was impossible to say which of them said the next words, the father or the foundation of 2 worlds. I need you to operate, my girl, on me. That is why a healer. That was always why a healer. And Kel? She asked, because triage never slept, even here. The boy from the 9th terrace. He walked down 3 days ago carrying a wand that wasn't his own making. Where is he kept? The clean keeping or the mine? Said the sea at once, firmly, and her father's face gentled around the word. Caught at the 80th step, well above the fever line, held whole. Tell his kin, the last thing he carried down was not the want. The water washed that off him at the first landing. It was never load-bearing, it was paint. What he carried under it, all the way to the keeping, was his mother's face on baking days. A pause. The saltmaster painted a boy and spent him, healer, to close a door on you. When you go back up, remember that I remember. The water keeps ledgers too, and its collection rate, said the foundation of 2 worlds, in a tone that was suddenly entirely dwarven, is excellent. The 9 minutes were ending. She could feel it in the shape of him, the rendered detail beginning to simplify, the workshop hands going first, and she gripped them, and her father gripped back, 3, and then 1, and smiled at her the way he had smiled at the end of every long drive, home in sight. Time, he said gently. Kept things keep, sweetheart. This isn't the last of the 9 minutes, it's the first. Go up. Cut what's wrong out of the dark. And Lena. The luminous face leaned close, and the last of it was all him, no sea in it at all. The count never failed, not once, not that night, not ever. The count is why the water knew your name. Now. The shape paused, turned, looked up the strand, past her, at the shore lamp, at the tall figure who had kept the watch at the edge of the light for 9 entire minutes without once intruding. And something passed across the rendered face that was pure mischief and pure mercy at once. The 2 things her father had always insisted were neighbors. One more patient tonight, I think, he said. The water's been keeping something for that boy for 30 years, and it says the family resemblance is getting painful to watch. Doramir. Her father's voice, cupped hands, the bleacher bellow that had embarrassed her at every graduation, rolling out across the foundation of 2 worlds. Get down here, son. You've got a visitor. Lena turned. Up the strand, at the edge of the shore lamp's light, the king of the Kant Peaks had gone absolutely still, and she watched the sentence land on him in stages, the way the worst and best news always landed. Incomprehension, then refusal, then the terrible arithmetic of 30 years and 1 glowing sea, and the water keeps everything, arriving all at once in a face that had spent a season learning to hope again and had not budgeted for this. The tear at his throat flared like a struck match. Bram's dead lamp knocked against his hip as he started forward, walking, then not walking, boots hitting the pale sand in strides that had abandoned all royal pretense, a 9-year-old with 900 years, coming down the shore of everything toward the rising water with his sister's name breaking out of him in the old tongue, in the child's diminutive, the one the memory stone had drunk from a 30-year-old solar and the whole mountain had wept to, and beside her father, out of the still and glowing sea, the water finished rising. Slighter. Silver-haired. Laughing already. That bright, helplessly infectious laugh the dark of the stair had filed with a librarian's care, with her arms already opening, and the first words out of the kept and shining shape of Lyriel of the Kant Peaks were so purely, exactly her, that Lena heard Doromir's heart break and mend in the same stride. 30 years, little brother, and you still run with your elbows out. Come here, we have 9 minutes, and you're going to spend the first one letting me look at you. Section 7. Lena gave them the distance she had been given, walked back up the pale sand to Healer's Range and stood her watch beside her father's quieting shape. And so she witnessed the reunion of the children of Erling the way the whole conversation deserved to be witnessed, as shape and music, not words. The words belonged to them, but some of it carried, across the still water, in the way of that place where everything carried and nothing intruded, and some of it Boromir gave her afterward, on the long climb, in pieces, as a man gives testimony, and some of it the seed stone at her throat drank quietly and would carry home to a mountain that had planted white flowers for 30 years. So the story kept it, the way the water kept everything. It kept the first minute, which Lyriel spent exactly as promised, holding her brother at arm's length in the shallows of the world's foundation, turning his face with one luminous hand like a jeweler with a stone, cataloguing 30 years, the silver in the dark hair, the crown's weight in the brow, the tear at his throat where their father's heartbeat used to keep it, and delivering her findings with the merciless tenderness that only eldest siblings are licensed to practice. They made you king. Delight and outrage in equal familiar measure. You, the one who hid from his own name-day feast in the Fletcher's loft? Oh, I have missed everything. No, that's wrong. The laugh gentled. I've missed nothing, little brother. The water showed me. I've been at every hunt you rode east, all 12. You cried in the Grey Pass on the 4th one, and I held you, and you thought it was the wind. I was at the bridgestones when you knelt for a dead lamp. I stood in the amphitheater. The whole keeping stood, Boromir, all of us, 10,000 years of the kept, when the human opened her life to the mountain. You have never heard applause until you have heard it from everyone who ever lived. The luminous hand pressed flat over the tear, over his heart under it. I saw Father crown you with his own hands. I heard what he told you. Evening Star. He got there, little brother. He was slow and he was proud, and he got there. And I need you to know that where I am, the getting there is what keeps. The slowness washes off. It was never load-bearing. It was paint. It kept, because the water was courteous and stretched the seams. The accounting of the bridge, which she gave him before he could ask, plainly, an elder sister clearing a table. Now. The night. You've carried 3 stories of it for 30 years. He pushed, he failed to reach, and lately, since Morvath knelt, the 3rd, the rope. So here is the 4th story, the true one, from the only witness who fell with it. Her voice did not waver, the kept do not waver, but the light in her rendered face banked low and steady, like a lamp turned down for honest talk. I walked out on that ice because Rowan was standing on the far side with our whole quest in his fist and a look on his face I had seen exactly once before, on a fox in a leg trap deciding. I was not brave, Boromir, and I was not deceived. I was his friend, and I did the arithmetic our whole family does. Someone has to walk toward the deciding, or it decides alone. And I was right. That is the part the survivor's memories could never hold, because they watched his silhouette and I watched his eyes. He had already turned Morvath down. He was walking back to me. His hand was out, not reaching. Reached, I had it, little brother. Our fingers touched, and then the world went from under us, and I fell with my hand still warm. The banked light held. He did not push. He did not fail. We were both of us reaching, and the rope was already cut, and the only failure on that bridge belonged to a knife 3 days behind us in the rocks. Put it down. All 3 stories, and the 4th one too. Put them down, Boromir. The water is very good at holding things. Give them to me and let me keep them, and walk back up those stairs carrying nothing about that night at all. It kept his answer, which was not words for a long time, and it kept the testament, the charge she laid on him at the end, when the 9 minutes had begun to simplify her hands, and she spoke quickly, the way she had always spoken when the hunt horn was sounding, and there was one more thing that mattered. Rowan. Listen, the fever line, the wound, all your war, yes, but listen, this is mine, this is my bequest and you will execute it. He has been looking for me for 30 years, not the portal, Boromir, not home, me. He walked into the ash because the ash held the wound and the wound goes into the water and the water took me. He worked that out within a year. He was always the cleverest of us, and he has spent 3 decades trying to make the deep answer him. The name on the waystation wall. 100 walls, little brother, the water has seen them all. He carves the river's name until his knives break because he is knocking on my door. The rendered face was fierce now, fierce and grieving and utterly Lyriel. And the water cannot answer him. Hear this exactly. Cannot, not will not. Morvath's mark is in him. The homesickness the enemy fed on left a hook. And any door the deep opens to Rowan, the enemy hears the hinge. 30 years my friend has knocked on a door that loves him and must play dead. So. Her hands, simplifying, gripped her brother's collar and pulled him close. Queen to king, sister to brother, the oldest command structure there is. When you find him, and the road east finds him, the water has seen that too. You will not lead with armies or judgments. You will stand where he can see you, and you will say, Lyriel is kept. She held your hand to the last inch. She sends this. And Lyriel of the Kant Peaks told her brother the words, the private ones, the Fletcher's Loft ones, and the story does not keep those, because some things even the water holds with the door closed. And the hook, Lyriel? Doromir's voice wrecked, soldier steady. If the enemy hears every hinge, if he's marked, what do I do with him once he knows? The shape of his sister smiled, at the very last, with the whole mischief of the girl who had taught a human soldier to read and a little brother to be worth crowning. You bring him to my healer, she said. Obviously, honestly, little brother, kings. But there was one more table to clear, and he was the one who set it, because he had knelt in a candlelit chamber a season ago and demanded one answer from an old traitor, and the demanding still weighed. Morvath, he said. You know, now, the rope, the rocks, the bargain, the water keeps everything. You've seen the knife and the hand on it. Lyriel, she serves us now, she turned, she is ours, and I have assigned my hatred elsewhere as instructed, and still I do not know what to carry back to her. What does the fallen carry to the one who cut the rope? His sister was quiet for the length of 3 of Lena's distant counted heartbeats. And when she answered, the light in her had gone very deep and very old, the keeping speaking with her, through her, the way the river ran under her voice. Tell the lady of the southern shores 3 things and tell her exactly. First, I have seen the whole night now from both sides of the gorge, and the arithmetic she was given had no clean answer, a rope or a daughter. The enemy builds only doors that close on you whichever way they swing. I know that architecture better than anyone alive or kept. Second, I do not forgive her because it is not mine to do. The fall was mine, but the 30 years were all of yours, and forgiveness is the living's craft. The rendered hands, simplifying, steadied themselves on her brother's arms. But third, and this is the bequest inside the bequest, Doromir, so carry it with both hands. Her daughter's scream is in the spear. When my healer keeps her promise, when the red crystal breaks, tell Morvath to be standing at running water, any running water, because everything the enemy's crystals keep, little brother, they keep stolen, cut out of the deep and taught to mean torment, and when the crystal breaks, what was stolen comes home, to me, to us, to the keeping. The fierce, grieving, utterly Lyriel smile, one last time. Merlin will not come out of that spear screaming, she will come out of it received. Tell her mother, 30 years the enemy has made her listen at a door of pain. Break the spear, and the door becomes a river, and the river runs to me, and I will be waiting on the shore of everything with my arms already open, the way one waits, said the kept princess of the Kant Peaks, for a sister. And the water took her home. The climb back up the Stair of Silence took the better part of a day, and it was, Lena would write in the strange ledger of her mind, the lightest 1,100 steps ever climbed. 2 people carrying between them, 1 empty lamp, 1 bequest, 1 surgical assignment, 1 message for a mother in another universe, and 30 fewer years than they had carried down. At the 200th step, at the last lamp of the world, Doromir stopped and took Bram's dead lamp from his belt, and Ada's from her pack, and looked at them a long moment. The water, said the fence. The message for your mother. It's safe to be sad now. He turned 1 lamp slowly in his hands. I have been thinking the whole climb about what I say to a mother of 2 on a bridge in trade tongue that means the same thing. You'll find it, Lena said. You're the king who conquered a city with a broken lamp. I had, said the king of the Kant Peaks, an exceptional healer. And then, because the dark of the stair was private, and the watch was theirs, and the count at both their throats had kept perfect time down 1,100 steps and back. Pending, I find, is fully discharged. New file. Name it. Kept, he said, and kissed her at the edge of the last lamplight, at the border of the world, thoroughly enough that the file required no further documentation. They came up into bells. Not the broken unison of dread, the true bells, the shift bells, rung in the pattern the undervault had not used in 11 years. The descent returns. The Lampfather's gallery was full before they cleared the final flight, and the roar that met them, dwarves do not drum, dwarves hammer, 10,000 fists on stone and shield rim in a rolling thunder that made the mountains singing seem a polite cousin, carried them up into a city that had already decided, lamp by lamp through a night of vigil, what it would believe when the stair gave them back. What followed was the swiftest diplomacy of 2 worlds, conducted at a war table by 2 exhausted climbers, a weeping deep king, and a serene dead one. But before the war table, before the maps, before even the deep king, Lena kept the first appointment, because triage never slept, and some debts outranked kings. She asked for Kel's mother. They met in a small warm room off the gallery, the saltcutter's widow and her kin, and the old lamp woman of the bridge standing behind them like a rampart. And Lena delivered the water's message whole, in trade tongue, exactly as kept, the 80th step, well above the fever line. The want washed off at the first landing. It was never load-bearing. It was paint. And what her son had carried down, all the way to the keeping, under everything a beautiful mourner had painted on him. "Your face," Lena said. On baking days. She had delivered death notifications in 2 worlds. She knew every country of that silence. This one broke differently. Broke upward somehow, the widow's sob landing halfway to a laugh. Because of all the things a mother rehearses hearing about a lost son, baking days is never one of them, and the unrehearsed true thing goes in past every armor. The old lampwoman gripped Lena's shoulder on the way out, hard enough to bruise, and said nothing at all, which from her was a speech. By the next bell, the story was on every terrace. Not Vade's question anymore. The answer: the deep keeps our boy whole, and it keeps him with her face. The remembrance on the 9th terrace, which had swelled for days on grief's momentum, halved overnight. Mourning that has been given its truth stops being available for rent. Vade, Lena thought, watching the terraces turn, would need a new instrument now. She was righter than she knew, and sooner. Then the war table. Lena gave the undervault everything. She had promised witness, and the seedstone had kept the shore, and Skalvar Emberoth listened to 11 years of his lamps answered. Tell him the lamps never once went out. He knows, said Deepfather gently. It was the first thing he asked the keeping. And then listened to the diagnosis, and the terms, and the assignment below the hollow deep, and did the thing that made Lena understand why the water chose the Emberoth line for its cup. He did not ask a single question about glory, precedence, or the theology of 10,000 years overturned in an afternoon. He asked, how many wardens, how much rope, and how soon? The operation took shape by the next shift bell. The infected reach pooled below the old South Deep roads, the drowned mines, sealed 900 years, that ran from beneath the 9th terrace down toward the country of the hollow deep, and the water's own guidance, relayed through Deepfather's level hands, was surgical in the oldest sense. The fever could not be fought in its pool, where it was vast. It had to be met at its neck, the one narrow ancient channel where the reach connected to the clean deep, and there, with instruments the water itself would provide, and hands it had spent 11 years and 2 universes selecting, severed, or healed, or both. The cup would be granted at the channel, the graft filled, the field cleaned, the undervault's relic would go up into the world through a wound closed behind it. 3 days to open the south approaches, Skalvar ruled, over maps older than nations. Wardens at every sealed door. My father guides. The healer cuts. The king. A glance at Doramir, at the tear. The water says the elfstone will be wanted at the neck. It is the sister graft. The fever will listen to it, the way the sick listen to kin. 3 days. They did not get 3 days. Master Vade had spent the vigil profitably. The counting room's basin had burned red twice during the descent. Twice, and urgent. And the instructions had changed register in a way that told the saltmaster his employer was, for the first time in their long and lucrative acquaintance, improvising. The deep was a blind country to the master's sight. Whatever had happened at the bottom of the stair had happened behind the one curtain in 2 worlds the red light could not part, and the master did not like curtains. And when the bells rang the descent's return and the terraces began to hammer their joy, the basin had flared like an opened furnace and given Vade the order he had been half dreading and half dressing for since a boy walked down a stair with a cup. The reach below the south roads, the old seals, open them. Vade had read the order twice, and then sat a long while with his soft accountable hands folded, doing the one thing his employer had never once seen him do in 30 years of salt and whispers, hesitating. He was not a fool. Foolishness was for the 6 men he was about to spend. He knew what 900 years of seals were for. He knew, better than the terraces, better than the timid kings, better than anyone under the ice save 2 climbers and a dead man, that the deep below the drowned mines did not keep gently. But he had built his whole long comfortable treason on one load-bearing belief, that the master's board had room on it, somewhere, for a clever and useful Vade, and orders refused were the one thing the board never kept. Grief keeps better than meat, he told the dark basin softly, rehearsing his own comfort. There will be grief enough to salt a century, and Vade will be the man who mourns it best. He did not do it himself. His hands were gild-soft and famously accountable. It was done in the hammering thunder of the celebration, when every warden's eye was on the gallery, by 6 men of the dissolved brotherhood who believed, because Vade had wept it to them beautifully, privately, one grieving craftsman to another, that behind the 900-year seals of the drowned mines lay the true deep, the honest deep, the deep that had been about to speak to Kel before the timid king's stare took him, that the strangers had gone down and bargained away the hold's birthright, and that all the 9th terrace need do to reclaim its own was open one old door and listen. 6 men, 3 seals, 1 shift bell of work with guild tools in a celebration's covering din. The drowned mines had been sealed 900 years ago against water. What came up the old south roads when the 3rd seal cracked was not water. It only moved like it at first in the dark along the floors, a rising black that lapped and gathered and did not reflect the 6 men's lamps but drank them, wick by wick, unhurried. And in the last lamplight the 6 saw the surface of it stand up, all along the flooded gallery, in shapes. Man shapes, dwarf shapes, old shapes and older ones, travelers and miners and the 9 centuries of the found, rendered in dark water the way a father had been rendered in light, and every one of them turned, with the frictionless quickness of things that do not negotiate with weight, toward the warm bright terraces above. The 6 men of the 9th did not scream either. The Reach had learned from Kel. It showed them each in its black glass the thing they wanted, and walked them, gently, deliberately, down into itself, 6 new keepings for a keeping that kept nothing whole. And in the counting room above, Master Vade watched his basin of brine go dark, not red-lit now, dark, dark as a cup on a step, and heard, far below the celebration's thunder, the first bell falter. Then the second. Then every bell in the undervault at once, not in unison. In collision. 11 years of impossible synchrony shattering into clangor, 10,000 years of order breaking note against note, and under the broken bells, rising through the stone of every terrace like the fen's pulse but faster, hungrier, climbing, came the sound of still water learning to move. At the war table, Deepfather rose from his chair for the first time in 3 days. The shining behind the deep brown eyes had gone storm pale, and both his voices spoke together, and neither of them was glad. The seals. The South Seals? Children, the fever is out of its bed. The found are climbing. And through the seed stone at Lena's throat, faint and fraying across half a world of stone and ice, 1 heartbeat behind the broken bells, came the Remembrancer's dry transmission voice, breaking protocol for the first time in a season of moonsets, with a message that had not waited for the appointed hour. Healer, the white flowers have closed.
Section 8. The 9th deep terrace was gone before the war table finished standing up. Not destroyed, taken. The reports that fought their way up through the broken bells described a terrace whose lamps had gone out from the lowest gallery upward, methodically, wick by wick, like a ledger being closed, whose canals had turned from warm lamplit copper to a black that gave nothing back, and whose people, the wardens said it steadily, because wardens are trained to say things steadily, were walking down, not fleeing down, walking, unhurried, in 2s and 10s and 50s, into the risen dark of the drowned roads, with their faces tilted towards something the survivors on the upper stairs could not see and did not want to. The count of the taken, by the second bell, stood at 411. Skalvar Emberoth received the number standing, and Lena watched a Deep King absorb the worst report of a 90-year line. 400 lamps on the fen, 30 years ago, had broken the world's alliance and sealed the roads for a generation. 411 in 1 bell, under his own city, on his own watch, and watched him do with it the only thing the hour permitted. He wrote the number in the ledger himself, in his own square hand, and said, to the war table, to the ledger, to 11 years of dreams. The water told my father it grieves everyone it must keep early. The fever grieves nothing. That is the whole of the difference, and the whole of the war. Proceed, healer. It shows them what they want, Lena said, cold to her boots, watching the map of the undervault sprout black pins. It's not an army, it's an exposure event. Everyone it touches gets Kel's black glass. Deep King, your city doesn't need soldiers first, it needs a quarantine line. Name it, said Skalvar Emberoth, and the undervault went to war the way Lena Marlowe ran a code, by protocol, at speed, with every hand assigned. The line was drawn at the 7th terrace, where the great canal ringed the cavern entire, and it was Deepfather, storm-pale and level, who gave them the first weapon, standing at the canal's edge, with his hands spread over the warm copper water, like a man greeting kin. The fever is water gone wrong, he said, both voices braided hard. But the canals are mine, drawn from the clean deep, every drop, since the first delving. It cannot cross what I still keep. Open the sluices, wring your city in its own blood. They opened the sluices. The ring canal rose brimming, and the first found that came climbing up the southern stairs to its edge stopped at the running water as at a wall of fire, pressed along it, patient, lightless, hunting a dry crossing, and did not pass. The second weapon the terraces discovered for themselves, and it would go into the ledgers as the lamplight standing. Light did not burn the found, nothing so merciful. Light showed them, and being shown, it turned out, was the one thing the wrong-keeping could not endure, because the found were kept things unstill and unconsoled, fragments in fever, and what the black water promised each of its takings was oblivion from being seen. A found that walked into massed lamplight slowed, wavered, stood in the full glare of 100 raised lamps, like a sleepwalker at a threshold, remembering, or being remembered. No one ever settled which, and while it stood, it took no one. And the third weapon was Phelan's, and it was the Count. He found it by accident and desperation on the 6th stair, cut off with a dozen evacuees behind a toppled ore sledge, a found flowing over the barricade, one of the 6 seal breakers, rendered fresh and terrible in black glass, and the boy soldier, out of blade room and out of ideas, did the thing the healing halls had drilled into his hands until it lived below thought. He pounded his fist on his chest twice and bellowed the marching count of the Western Wardens to steady the civilians for a rush. 3 and 1. 3 and 1. The found stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. Mid-flow, the black surface of it shivering all over like struck water, and from somewhere inside, the dark render of a man who had been alive 2 bells ago, came a sound that no one on that stair ever agreed on afterward. A sob, a note, a syllable of a name, and Phelan, whose 2 lungs Lena had once salvaged with steam and stubbornness, stood his ground on genius or terror and kept the count, fist to chest, voice cracking, while 12 civilians fled behind him. And the found stood in the rhythm like a man standing in rain. He had been missing for 900 years and did not take him. The word ran the terraces faster than the dark had. The Count holds them, and the undervault, which had hammered its joy at the stairs' return 2 bells ago, turned 10,000 fists to war. Hammer rhythm rolling around the quarantine ring in relays, shift by shift, terrace by terrace, the whole city become one vast chest-keeping, one vast pulse, lamps blazing above the ring canal in an unbroken constellation, and the found stood at the water's edge in their silent hundreds, shone and counted, swaying to a rhythm 9 centuries of wrong-keeping had not managed to wash out of them. Lena spent the first bells of it where she spent every disaster, at the worst seam. The 8th terrace evacuation came up the stairs to the quarantine line in a river of the living, miners and bakers and lamp children, the whole warm ordinary census of the deep city, and she worked the bridgehead triage with Ithreni, sorting the stunned from the hurt from the touched, the handful who had looked too long into black water before their neighbors dragged them back, and who now stood in the lamplight with their faces still tilted towards something no longer there. The touched could be recalled. That was her second great finding of the night, worth 100 soldiers. A touched dwarf sat down firmly in full lamplight, with a living hand gripping theirs, and a voice keeping the count against their knuckles, came back, slowly, shivering, weeping, but back, because the black glass's promise was oblivion from being seen, and the antidote, it followed, was being seen thoroughly, stubbornly, by name. She taught it to the lampwives and the guild mothers in the time it took to demonstrate twice. Hold the hand, keep the count, say their name until they say it back, and by the 3rd bell, the bridgehead had a recovery ward running on nothing but lamplight, grip, and the oldest medicine on 2 worlds, administered by grandmothers. One of the recalled was a lamp child of perhaps 7, dragged off the 8th stair by her uncle with her eyes gone glass, and when she finally shuddered back behind them and said her own name, the first thing she did was look down at the salt bead bootlace on Lena's wrist, her own terrace's craft, and grip it and start, in a small raw voice, to count 3 and 1. The bridgehead did not stop working. The bridgehead had no time, but the bridgehead heard it, and the drumming above them, for one passing shift of rhythm, gentle to match a 7-year-old's tempo before swelling back to war. The line nearly broke once, at the South Span Bridge, in the black hours, a found unlike the others, vast and old, some 900-year keeping of the first drowned generation, that did not stop at the running water but gathered itself against it, black glass rising off its shoulders into a standing wave, and the lamps guttered along 50 feet of parapet, and the count faltered, and it was Doromir who held the span. He did not draw steel. Steel had done nothing all night. He walked out onto the emptying bridge with the tear of the first tree blazing in his raised fist, kinlight, sister-graft, and stood in the wave's shadow and spoke to the fever the way the water had taught them all to speak, as to a patient. "You were kept once," said the king of the Kant Peaks, in trade tongue, to 9 centuries of the unstill, his voice carrying flat and clear under the drumming, cleanly, warmly. "I carry your kin. Feel it. It remembers what keeping is for. Whatever the wound has taught you to want, this is not it. Stand down and be shown. And the standing wave stood, trembling, black, taller than the bridge towers, and the tear pulsed its slow 10,000-year pulse into the dark like a heartbeat lent across a gulf, and the wave, at last, unbuilt itself and sank back behind the running water, and the found along the whole southern arc swayed and were quiet in the manner of a ward after the worst bed settles. Kin, Deepfather said quietly at the war table when it was reported. You begin to see why the granting frightens the fever, children, and why it will do anything, to be present at it. It could not hold forever. That was the arithmetic under the drumming, and everyone at the war table could do it. The fever's pool was 900 years deep, and the city's arms were mortal, and every bell more black pins. The line bought time. The time had exactly one purchase worth making. The neck, Lena said. Now, tonight, mid-battle, because mid-battle. The Reach has emptied its strength up the south roads to take the city. Its neck has never been thinner. Deep King, the operation goes now, or the quarantine line becomes the front line of a siege we lose by spring. Skalvar looked at the map, at the black pins, at the drumming dark beyond his ring of light and water, and at the healer his father had walked 11 years into the earth to summon. Durm, he said, open the surgeon's road. They almost missed Vade entirely in the mobilization's roar. It was the lamp woman who caught him. She had installed herself at the 7th Terrace muster. Nobody had ordered it, and nobody was going to argue with it. Running the lamp relays with her Bridgestone voice, and it was there, in the torrent of wardens and oil carriers, that she saw the master of the Salt Guild moving against the flow, downstream, southward, toward the evacuated galleries, with a porter's pack on his soft shoulders and his beautiful morning face arranged for exactly no audience. She had buried 2 sons and 30 years on other people's arranged faces. She knew a man wearing grief the way she knew a lamp burning the wrong oil, by the color of the light and the smell of the smoke. And she had stood on the 9th terrace through every bell of the beautiful remembrance and watched this man conduct her niece's grandnephew's mourning like a guild investment, and something in her had been waiting, patient as Bridgestone, for the audit. She put down her lamp roster and followed him 3 galleries on legs older than his treason, and when she was sure, when she watched him unlock a sealed maintenance stair down toward the drowned roads with a key no saltmaster held, she stood in the gallery behind him and did not shout for wardens. She rang the bridge bell, the old signal, the one every dwarf child learned before their first lamp. Breach below. The wardens took the gallery in 100 heartbeats. Vade, halfway through his stolen door, with the black rising visible in the stairwell beneath him, turned back to the ring of iron and lamplight, and Durm would report this to the war table with professional bafflement, smiled, warmly, delightedly, the climate of him wrong to the very last, and held up between 2 soft fingers, by way of farewell, a sliver of crystal that lit the gallery's lamplight red. You'll want to know why, he called up, conversational across the drawn bows. You always want to know why, you honest people. It's what makes you such reliable furniture. So, for the ledgers, the master requires a witness at the granting, something of his, present, when the deep concentrates itself to give. You've all been so helpful. The healer opens the door, the city holds the fever's attention, and Vade. He stepped backward, off the lip, into the black that rose to receive him like an employer's hand, and his voice came up out of the dark, still warm, still delighted, already doubling. Vade carries the salt. The black took him downward, south, fast, toward the drowned mines, toward the neck. The lampwoman stood at the broken seal with the wardens, looking down into the dark after him, and rendered the 9th terrace's verdict on its beautiful mourner in the flat Bridgestone voice that had once outvoted a demagogue by walking into a room. Light the door, she said, and tell the healer she has a race. The surgeon's road went down through the war. Durm led, 12 picked wardens, then the company entire. For Lena had looked at the roster Skalvar proposed, and struck the word escort and written surgical team, and assigned them the way she assigned a theatre. Deepfather at the fore, the one banner the fever's pieces still half remembered. Doramir and the tear beside her at the core. The fever listens to Kin, with Bram's and Otter's lamps on his belt. Vilis and the wardens as the sterile field. Ithreni as second surgeon. Phelan, over Vilis's objection, and on Lena's flat insistence, as the count. He found the anesthetic, she said. He administers it. They crossed the ring canal on the last bridge with the whole 7th terrace drumming above them, and the lamp woman met them at the bridgehead with fire. She had Bram's lamp and otters off the king's belt before Doromir could speak. Proprietary, unceremonious, a mother collecting her sons, and filled them from her own oil flask, and struck the light, and the 2 lamps that had been dark for 30 years took flame together at the edge of the dark water, and the muster fell silent around the burning of them, 10 deep, drumming and all. You said until they burn again, she told the king of the Kant Peaks, and set the lit lamps back in his hands, one, then the other, steady as bridgestone. They're burning. So here is the new debt, elf, and it replaces the old one entire. My sons, light your way down, bring my lamps back up. And to Lena, gripping her wrist one last bruising time, the deep told you its collection rate is excellent. Go collect. They went down into the drowned roads by the light of Bram and Otter, into galleries where the black stood in still pools along the floors, and drew back, slowly, grudgingly, shone and counted, from Deep Father's pale shining, and the tears blazing teal, and the 2 small stubborn flames of the lamps. And the deeper they went, the more the dark to either side thickened with the found, standing in their lightless ranks in the flooded side galleries, watching the surgical team pass with 900 years of unstill hunger held, barely, audibly, the black surfaces of them shivering, at bay by a marching count and a boy's cracking voice. 3 and 1. 3 and 1. If you have ever seen a city discover that its oldest habits, its lights, its drums, its stubborn, unkillable customs, were armor all along, laid up against a night nobody living remembered preparing for, then you know why the team that walked down the fever's throat that night walked it steadily. They carried a mountain's drum, a terrace's salt, 2 relit lamps, a kinstone, and the count. They were, Lena thought, the best armed surgical team in the history of 2 worlds, and not one of them carried a weapon that could kill. The drowned mines announced themselves by ceasing to be architecture. The worked galleries of the deep roads gave way, past the 9th junction, to older delvings, 900-year-old faces of raw-cut stone, flooded to the knee, where the black no longer pooled at the margins, but was the floor, parting sullen and shivering around Deep Father's advancing light in a moving circle of shallows, and the air changed, thickened, took on the smell Lena's hindbrain knew from every septic theatre of her first life, the smell of a body fighting itself. Ithreni named it aloud, second surgeon confirming the field. We are inside it now, past the skin. Nobody answered. Phelan kept the count. Doromir walked at Lena's shoulder with a burning sun in each hand, and once, only once, a found surged from a side gallery close enough that its risen black hand entered the lamplight, and what stopped it, 18 inches from Lena's throat, was not steel and not shining. It was Bram's lamp, thrust between them by the king's fist, and the found recoiled from the little flame, as from a name, hung there, shivering, shone, and folded back into the dark with a sound that every soul in the column would hear on hard nights for the rest of their lives, a sound like a sob going under. Steady, Valus said, to everyone, to himself. Surgeons don't flinch at what the wound does. Walk. At the mouth of the 9th gallery, where the old maps said the drowned mines proper began, the found stood so dense that the black of them was a wall, and the wall, as Deep Father raised his hand, parted, folded back from the road in 2 silent, lightless masses, opening a corridor exactly wide enough, exactly long enough, an honor guard of the wrong keeping, and every instinct Lena owned from 2 worlds of triage said it at once, flat and cold, in her father's workshop cadence, trap. They're not yielding. They're funneling. They know, she said aloud. Deep Father, the reach. It knows where we're going. Of course it knows, Green Eyes. Both voices, level, storm pale. It has known since the shore. It is fever, not fool. It is of the deep. What the deep purposes, it feels, the way a wound feels the surgeon's shadow. He did not slow. It let its pieces climb and spend and stand in your lamplight, and it opened its roads, because everything it has done since the seals broke has been spent on purchasing this one arrangement, you and the kinstone and the cup's appointed hands, walking of your own will down its throat. It could not come to the granting. The pale shining turned and looked at her, and for the first time since a stairhead 11 years in the promising, the gladness in it was fully, terribly gone. So it has arranged for the granting to come to it. Behind them, at the 9th gallery's mouth, the parted wall of the Found flowed silently closed across the road home, and ahead, down the drowned corridor, out of a dark that had learned to want, came a voice, not 2 voices braided, but hundreds, thousands, 9 centuries of the unstill speaking as one, in a register that made the black pools shiver and the 2 small lamps gutter and hold, and what it said, rolling up the flooded gallery to meet them, was almost, horribly, a welcome. The lamp comes down to us. Little light, little count, little keeper of hours, come, we have been so long unseen. Show us. Phelan's count faltered, 1 beat, and caught. The 2 lamps burned, the tear blazed, and Lena Marlowe, sealed in the fever's throat with the road home closed behind her, a race lost or won somewhere below, where a saltmaster carried a red sliver toward the granting, and 900 years of the unstill asking, in their terrible collective voice, for the one thing on 2 worlds she had never once refused a patient, squared her small shoulders in the lamplight, and answered the dark the way she had answered every dark since a corridor at 4 a.m. Then hold still, said the healer of 2 worlds. This is going to hurt. Section 9. The neck of the fever was a cathedral that 2 waters had been fighting over for 900 years. The drowned corridor delivered them into it without warning, a chamber vaster than the Lampfather's gallery, its ceiling lost, its floor a single great channel of living water, and the channel was a battle line. From the south, filling half the vault, pressed the black, the reach entire, the fever's concentrated body, black glass rising off its surface in slow-standing shapes that formed and watched and unformed. From the north, up the ancient channel from the clean deep, glowed the light Lena had last seen from a shore at the bottom of the world, pressing back, patient, vast, and losing. Anyone with eyes could read the waterline, the centuries of black creep ringing the stone like tide marks, each ring higher than the last. And in the black, hanging suspended in it, down the whole southern reach of the chamber, like insects in dark amber, were the 411, alive. That was the first thing Lena's eyes confirmed, and her knees nearly buckled under. The taken of the 9th terrace hung in the risen dark breathing, slow tidal breaths, faces tilted toward private glass, held not as the Found were held, not rendered, not drowned, but stored. Hostages, her tactical mind said. Provisions, said something colder. Patience, said the only voice she ever obeyed. It kept them alive, she breathed. Deep, Father. Why? Because the fever is of the deep, green eyes, and the deep does not kill what it keeps. Both voices, level and grim. Even fevered, it keeps. That is its whole broken nature. It has taken them wrong, but it cannot unmake its own law. They can be shown home, all of them. The pale shining turned to her. That is your theater, healer. The channel is your table. And you have until the fever understands that we did not come to bargain. The surgical team deployed the way she had drawn it on a war table an age ago that morning. Wardens with lamps at every point of the chamber's rim, the sterile field, massed light pouring down onto the black until the whole southern reach was shown, and the standing shapes slowed and swayed. Phelan took the count to the channel's very edge, fist to chest, and the warden's drums took it up behind him, and the rhythm rolled out over 2 waters. Doromir walked the north rim with the tear blazing and a burning sun in each hand, kinlight and lamplight, and where he walked the black waterline visibly, grudgingly, sank. Ithren ran the recovery line with Derm's 12. As the shown black slackened its grip, the suspended taken drifted, were released one by one, like a fist unclenching finger by finger, toward the boundary where clean water met dark, and the clean water took them, and bore them gently north along the channel's edge, to the shallows, where the second surgeon waited with warm furs and the oldest medicine. Hold the hand, keep the count, say their name until they say it back. They came back weeping. They came back asking for mothers, for shift partners, for lamps. A miner of 60 years came back roaring the second verse of a forge song, as if no time had passed since the black took him midline. A lamp child came back, the 7th recovered, the one Lena carried to the shallows herself, already counting. One of Derm's own patrol came out of the dark amber, a road warden taken at the first breach, and Derm broke formation for the only time in the night, waded to the recovery line, gripped his warden by the beard with both hands, and administered the oldest medicine in a voice like a rockfall trying to be gentle. Bren, Bren, you owe me a boot repair and 3 silver, Bren, and I am not writing it off. Say your name. And when Bren said it, the drill bit captain stood there in the shallows, with his forehead against his warden's and his shoulders shaking, and every dwarf on the recovery line pretended, with ferocious courtesy, to be very busy. The operation ran 4 bells, and it nearly broke twice. The first time was the fever's surge, the black massing suddenly behind its remaining hostages in the 3rd bell, 100 suspended sleepers drawn together into a living shield wall, while the dark gathered behind them for a rush at the channel. Hostage work, old as war, and the lamps could not fire on it, and the Count alone would not stop it. It was Doromir who answered, who walked out along the north rim to the closest point of the black, and did the thing no tactical mind would have priced. He set down both burning lamps on the stone, unclasped the tier of the first tree, and held it out over the dark water at arm's length, unguarded, kinlight swinging free on its silver chain above 900 years of hunger. "You want keeping," said the king of the Kant Peaks, to the massed fever, conversationally, the way a man speaks at a sickbed. "Here is the oldest keeping in the elven world. Take a hostage wall to it, and it goes home to the mountain, and you starve for another 9 centuries. Kneel, and I will hold it over you all night, like a lamp for a child, until every one of you is shown." The surge stood, and trembled, and broke, not away, downward, kneeling, and Valis, on the rim, was heard to observe to no one that the king's father had once conquered a city with a broken lamp, and the son had apparently decided to hold the family record. The second time was Phelan. 4 bells of the Count at the channel's edge is a thing no throat was built for. His voice went in the middle of the Colossus's rising, cracked, shredded, gone, and the boy stood at the lip of 2 waters, with his fist still striking his chest, and no sound coming out, and the whole operation swayed on the missing rhythm. What saved it came from behind, from the recovery shallows, where a 7-year-old lamp child sat wrapped in warm furs, who saw the Count falter and stood up and took it. Small, raw, 7 years old, striking her chest, 3 and 1. Then the recovered miner beside her, forge song voice. Then Bren, and Derm, and the whole recovery line, the rescued keeping the Count for their rescuers. And Phelan stood at the channel's edge, conducting it with his silent fist, and tears running into his collar, and the Count came back to the cathedral bigger than any one throat, carried by the very people the fever had taken, which was, Ithreni said afterward, the precise moment the 900-year dark understood that it had already lost. And Lena Marlowe stood at the center of the channel's edge, at the meeting line of 2 waters, and conducted. There was no better word for what the operation became, and no honest way to unbraid whose hands did what. The lamps showed, the Count steadied, the tear called kin, the clean deep received, but it was the healer who read it, minute by minute, the whole vast patient at once, who saw which reach of black was slackening and sent the light there, who caught the fever massing for a surge behind its hostages and moved Doromir's kinlight to meet it, who called the rhythm changes down the drum relays like tempo to an orchestra. Slower now, it's tiring. Gentle it down, and who, when the oldest black of all began to rise from the channel's southern deep, called the halt that saved every lamp in the chamber, the first generation. The 900-year drowned, the original keeping of the wrong water. They rose from the fever's floor as one shape, a black glass colossus of braided bodies, miners and travelers of a dwarven age before the seals, and the voice of them was the chamber-shaking collective that had welcomed the team down the throat. And it did not sway to the Count, and it did not slacken the light, because it was not, Lena understood in one long, cold, clinical instant, resisting the showing. It was ashamed. "You show the new taken home," the 1,000-voice rolled, and the black colossus stood in the massed light like a man standing in a doorway he cannot cross. "They are barely wet, but we are 900 years of the wrong keeping, little light. We have fed. We walked your 6 seal breakers down. We are not fragments the clean water lost. We are what the wound made, and the clean deep is bright, and we remember brightness, and we cannot, we will not be seen like this." And there it was, the true face of the whole fever, 9 centuries down. Not hunger first, hunger second. First, and always, and under everything, the oldest wound in every ward Lena had ever worked, the certainty of the damaged that they had become unfit to be looked at. She walked to the very lip of the channel, into the Colossus's shadow, small and lamplit at the edge of 2 waters, and every soul and kept soul in the cathedral heard the healer of 2 worlds deliver the finding that won the night. "I've been shown your chart, she called up into the black. All of it. The feeding, the taking, the 6 men, the 411, 900 years of symptoms, and I am not here to pretend they didn't happen. But I stood on the shore of the clean deep 3 days ago, and I asked it what it keeps, and it told me, and I am now going to tell you, because somebody should have told you 9 centuries ago. She lifted her voice the way she lifted it over monitors. It keeps worth, not records, not verdicts, worth. It kept a boy's mother on baking days and washed the want off him at the first landing. It was never load-bearing. It was paint. 900 years of fever is paint, do you hear me? Thick paint. The thickest I've ever seen. But the water is old, and the water reads under paint, and there is not one thing in this chamber, not one, that it has looked at and found nothing worth keeping. She spread her hands, torchlit, stethoscope and drumbeat and salt. You asked me to show you, so here's the showing. From the only doctor on 2 worlds with your chart. You are not what the wound made. You are what it painted. And below you, right now, the clean deep is holding the channel open and asking me to tell you the same thing it told my father, that I now tell every patient in this cathedral, alive or kept. Her voice broke and held and carried. Being kept is fine. It's better than fine. Come home and see. The black colossus stood in the light for the space of 10 drummed counts. Then it came apart. Not collapsing, kneeling, 900 years of braided dark, lowering itself into the channel like a congregation going down, and the boundary line of the 2 waters, for the first time in 9 centuries, moved south. Which was, of course, the moment Vade arrived, because the enemy's timing was the enemy's whole art, and the granting had begun. The clean deep was rising. It came up the ancient channel in a slow tide of glow as the black knelt and was received. And at the channel's heart the light was concentrating, gathering into a column, a presence, the deep arriving in person to its appointment as it had arrived at a shore, and rising within the column, borne upward on the water itself, level and golden, and no longer full of night but of light, came the cup. And out of the black at the chamber's southern rim, carried high on the last unkneeling wave of the fever like a courier on a spent horse, came the saltmaster of the 9th terrace, soft hands raised, red sliver burning between them like a struck match at a christening, his beautiful voice ringing off the cathedral stone with the delight of a man arriving precisely on schedule. A witness, Vade called, to the column, to the cup, to the concentrated presence of the foundation of 2 worlds. The master sends his regards to the granting and asks only to watch. 3 things happened inside the same held drumbeat. The fever's last wave, the wave carrying him, the wave he had paid for with 6 men and 411, stopped kneeling. Lena felt the whole chamber's healing hesitate, the shown dark flinching from the red light, the way scar tissue flinches from the instrument that made it, 900 years of the wrong-keeping remembering, at the worst possible instant, exactly whose script had taught their wound to want. Deepfather turned from the column, and both his voices said one word, and the word was, Archer. And Valus of the Kant Peaks, who had threaded an arrow through darkness and a doorway into a Terima's wrist in a king's bedchamber a season and a world ago, and who had been tracking the red light since it cleared the black, because tracking abominations was the one prayer he knew, loosed. The arrow took the sliver out of Vade's raised hands at 40 paces and shattered it against the cathedral wall. What came out of the breaking was not an explosion and not a scream. It was a thread, thin, red, luminous, a single strand of stolen keeping unspooling from the shards, and the thread did what Lyriel had promised broken crystals do. It ran home. It arced down off the wall, over the flinching black, over the kneeling dark, and slid into the risen glow of the clean deep like a needle into a vein. And the column of light at the channel's heart drank it, and went very still, and every water in the cathedral, clean and fevered, shown and keeping, stood motionless for one enormous listening instant, while the foundation of 2 worlds followed its own stolen word, back up the thread, back through the theft, back along 900 leagues of crystal network toward the hand that had cut it. And the deep said, in a voice that used every register at once, her father's and Harrick's, and the 1,000 of the found and the river under all of them, with an emotion Lena had never heard from it and would never forget. There you are. The light of the column flared cathedral-wide, and in the flare, one heartbeat seared into every witness. The water showed them what it saw at the thread's far end, a fortress of fused obsidian, a wound hanging in darkness, a spear with a bright crystal tip whipping around as if stung, And behind the spear, rank upon rank of absence, of emptiness, the ash plains stretching to the horizon, and the horizon bare. The army of holes was gone. Ashvale stood empty. The ranks that had waited in the red glow for 30 patient years were no longer waiting. They were marching. The granting, when it came, was almost quiet. The black knelt and was received, all of it, to the last wave, Vade's spent courier horse dissolving out from under him, so that the saltmaster dropped the final 10 feet into water that was no longer his employer's and was efficiently, unceremoniously audited. The clean deep took him under without violence, held him a long moment in the glow, and let what there was of him settle into the keeping. It did not take long. The ledgers of the undervault would record the deep's finding in a single line that dwarven mothers would use on ambitious children for 100 years. Of Master Vade, the water kept the memory of a man who once, as an apprentice, gave his lunch to a hungry lamp child, and nothing further. The channel healed, not severed, healed. The tidemark rings of 9 centuries fading from the stone as the two waters became one water. The boundary line dissolving south down the reach toward the deep pool below the hollow deep country, where the fever's source still waited, diminished now, cut off from its stolen arm, but vast and elsewhere and patient. Book 3, something in Lena noted, in the flat voice her mind used for futures. That pool has a debt too. And at the channel's heart, the column of light bent itself down to the healer of 2 worlds and set the golden cup, the first of the 5, the dwarves' graft, filled now with water that glowed like the shore of everything, into her 2 raised hands, and the voice of the foundation said, simply, in her father's register, the words of every handover in every theatre she had ever served. Patience yours, doctor. They came up out of the drowned roads into a city that had counted every soul home. The 411 walked out of the south galleries on their own feet, into a 7th terrace that broke its quarantine line running. The drums collapsed into the hammering thunder, and the thunder into weeping, and the weeping into shift songs, and the lamp woman met the surgical team at the Ring Canal Bridge and took back her 2 burning sons with hands that did not shake, and looked a long time at the cup of light in the healer's arms, and said only, Bridgestone to the last, told you, excellent rate. It was at the anvil's root, in the low, warm ledger room, that the cost came due. But first, the ledger took its brightest entry. Skalvar Emberoth stood before the cup of light, with his whole council behind him, and did the thing 30 years of sealed roads had made unthinkable. He opened them. Let it be written, said the deep king of all the holds, in the formal register, his square hand flat on the master ledger, that the golden cup, first graft of the deep, passes to the keeping of the healer Lena Marlowe, and the road of the 5, freely, gladly, and escorted, the holds march with it. Wardens to the eastern doors, engineers to the quest's road, and when the 5 things stand at the river and the wound is closed, let the ledger show the dwarves were not fetched to the war of the worlds, nor argued into it, nor shamed. Let it show we paid forward, for 400 lamps on the fen, for 411 walked home, for 11 years of dreams, and for 1 healer who taught the deep terraces that the Count holds. He looked up from the ledger, coal-eyed, and 30 years of grudge closed like a healed channel. The mountain and the ice are done being strangers, Majesty. Tell your 9 houses, the black roads are open, and the first debt of the new age is ours. Then the brightest entry closed, and the cost stood up from the work table. Deep Father stood at his son's ledgers, and the shining behind the deep brown eyes was sinking, gently, gradually, a tide going out that would not turn, and Harrick Emberoth's own voice, gravel alone now, more his own with every word, said the thing 11 years of level hands had earned the right to say briefly, the task is done. The lending ends. It gives me, this is its word, Skalvar, mark it in the ledger, it gives me back, not to the air, to the keeping, whole, and still, and content, with your mother, who has been asking after my lamp mending, in terms I will not repeat before foreigners. The old Deep King smiled at his old son, and the smile was entirely, finally his. 11 years I held a cup-level boy. Now you hold the holds level, and the roads open, and the healers rode east most of all. The water says, the tide went further out, and the voice went with it, further and calmer. The water says the wound has stopped drinking, Skalvar. Do you understand what that means? A wound that drinks is feeding. A wound that stops. The brown eyes closed. The last of the shining went home down the Stair of Silence, like a lamp carried carefully to bed. A wound that stops. Lena finished into the silence, cold to the soles of her boots, the cup of light steady in her hands, and the empty ash horizon burning behind her eyes, is either healing or about to be used.
Section 10. They buried Harrick Emberoth twice, because he had earned both funerals. The first was the dwarven rite, in the vault of anvils where 90 generations of Deep Kings lay under stone. The ledger reading, the forge hymn, the sealing of his tools beside him, and his miner's lamp, the one he had been mending on the night the healer walked into his son's ledger room, repaired at last by Skalvar's own hands and buried burning, a thing no ledger recorded ever having been done, because no Deep King before Harrick had ever come home from below the last lamp. The second funeral was not a funeral at all, and it was Lena's prescription, written for a city she had learned to read like a chart. At the shift bell of deep night, the whole undervault walked down to the Lampfather's gallery, the recovered 411 at the front by right, and stood at the Stair of Silence where 11 years of dread had lived, and did the thing that redefined the place forever. They lit their lamps. All of them. For the dead of the deep roads you carried your lamp dark, and lit it only if they came home. And they had come home, hadn't they? All of them. The taken and the found and the first drowned generation and one lamp-mending king. Home to the keeping, whole and still and content, in water that glowed like the shore of everything. So the undervault stood at the top of 1100 steps and lit 10,000 lamps for 900 years of homecomings, and the light went down the Stair of Silence like a tide going the right way, and the wardens at the gallery doors swore, steadily, because wardens say things steadily, that far below, at the very bottom of the world, something vast and patient and glowing had risen along the shore to watch. It was the 411 who began the singing. No one planned it. The recovered do not plan. They had all of them been shown, down in the dark amber, and come back carrying something of the showing, and what they sang at the stairhead was not any hymn in the guild books. It was the forge song's second verse, the one the old miner had come back roaring, taken up voice by voice down the gallery until 10,000 lamps shook with it, and Lena, standing between two kings with her face wet and her count steady, heard beneath the melody the thing the recovered were actually doing, and filed it under the heading her whole second life kept returning to. They were singing back. To the keeping. To their own 900 years of neighbors in the glowing dark. A city and its dead, calling the count to each other across 1100 steps. Alive, alive, kept, kept, still here, and no wall in two worlds between them anymore except depth, which was, the water had taught them all, no wall at all. The two pillars of the stairhead got a third line that week, cut beneath the old cold warning by the Guild of Masons, unbidden, in the plain deep runes of a working people. Below this step, the mountain owes you nothing. Below this step, the water keeps everything. Walk accordingly. The war council that followed was the grimmest bright morning of the new alliance. They met at the anvil's root with the cup of light on the table between the maps. It changed the room, the cup. Arguments conducted in its glow kept finding themselves de-escalating. And the business before the two kings and the healer was a single world-sized question. Where was the army of Ashvale? The wiretap glimpse had given them one seared heartbeat of intelligence. The ranks gone, the plains bare, the spear stung and whirling. The loremaster's seedstone had kept the image, and Valus had spent 2 days at it with the patience of a man reading track, and his findings delivered flat, rearranged the map. The ash shows column sign. Wide as a river, running north and east from the fortress, one great march, not raiding parties. North and east, majesties, not west toward the mountain. Not toward any road our parade lie ever sold him. The scarred finger came down on the map, on the country between Frost Hollow's edge and the far ovals, on the red canyons and the black cave mouths and the deep sink of land the old cartographers had hatched with warning marks and the dwarves had sealed their south roads against for 900 years. He marches on the hollow deep, and through it, on the canyons, on the orcs. The pool, Lena said. The cold was all the way into her boots and climbing. Deepfather's last words. The wound has stopped drinking. Morvath's portal has been sipping the deep for 30 years because sipping was all the wound could bear without collapsing. But the fever's pool below the hollow deep is 900 years of the deep already gone wrong, already separated, already taught to want. He doesn't need to drink through a straw anymore. She looked up and said the diagnosis that would drive the third book of her second life. He's marching to the pool. He's going to drink the infection, plumb his wound straight into 9 centuries of corrupted keeping and use it the way he uses everything, as fuel and as an army. We cut off the fever's arm before it reached this city. He's marching to shake hands with the body. The silence had the specific weight of a room doing terrible arithmetic. And Tarek-sized people are standing on the lid of it, Doramir said quietly. The canyons ride directly over the hollow deep country. The orcs have guarded their tooth and their tunnels against the world for 30 years, and the world's worst thing is about to come up through their floor. He looked at Lena across the cup's glow. Backwards order, healer. We planned the giants first. the far ovals, the thin end of his design, but his design just moved. Then so do we. She had already seen it. The whole table had. The road east is the canyon road now. Book the giants for after. The orcs first, because the orcs are about to be the front line of two worlds whether anyone asks them or not. And because... the healer's flat honesty. Because I've read Erling's file on terrifies people 3 times, and the single unforgivable insult in the canyons is pity, and if we arrive after the pool rises, pity is all we'll have left to offer. We go now, we go fast, and we arrive as allies before we're needed as mourners. It was into that resolve that the last relay came, the seedstone waking at Lena's throat with the remembrancer's dry transmission voice, and the voice, for the second time in a season, breaking protocol. And the War Council of the New Alliance stood in silence and listened to the news from a shorehouse half a world west. The moonset came and went, healer. The shard did not light, nor the moonset before. The lady has knelt to a dead crystal twice now, the first silence in 30 years. Her window is closed from his side. A pause, dry and precise and, underneath, afraid. But hear the order of events exactly, for the lady insists you weigh it. The shard's final transmission came the night your deep bells rang the granting. One question only, no instructions, no courtesies, and then the dark. The lady bids me give you his question word for word. The seedstone's warmth pulsed once, like a held breath, and delivered the last words the enemy had spent on his oldest instrument. He asked, "Lady, when the healer reaches the river at last, does she mean to close the wound or to heal it? Learn this. It has become the only question on the board." And then, said the remembrancer's voice, the red light had gone out and had not come back, and Lady Morvath of the southern shores had sat a long time in the dark of the shorehouse, and then said one sentence for the record, which the remembrancer now repeated in the tone of a woman handling a live blade. 30 years he has never once asked a question he feared the answer to. Tell the healer, she has finally frightened him. Tell her also, frightened is when he is most dangerous and most honest. Close or heal. Child, decide before he decides for you. The council sat with the question a long time after the relay faded, because it was the kind of question that rearranged the furniture of everything already decided. It was Ithrene, second surgeon, who finally laid it on the table in clinical terms. Close is what we have all meant for 30 years. Seal the wound, sever the worlds. The portal dies, the crossings end, the enemy is walled in his ash with his crystals, and the deep is left scarred but safe, and the healer, she looked at Lena steadily, colleague to colleague, doing her the courtesy of saying it. The healer chooses a world, because a closed wound has 2 sides, and she can stand on only one. That is close, and heal? The past healer's weathered hands turned palm up. None of us knows what heal is. The word did not exist on this board until a monster asked it in fear. Which is, I confess, the best recommendation I have ever heard for a course of treatment. The water knows, Lena said quietly. The cup glowed on the maps between them. It told me to operate. It never once said amputate, and in 12 years and 2 worlds, I have never met a wound that preferred sealing to healing. Only surgeons who preferred it, because sealing is faster, and healing asks the wounded to stay open longer, and staying open is the most expensive thing a body ever does. She looked around the war table, at the kings and the captains and the second surgeon, and gave them the honest chart. I don't know the answer yet. I know the question is mine now. He made sure of that. And I know one more thing, which the council should weigh before we ride. He is not afraid I'll close the wound. He's had 30 years to prepare for closing. Closing is in his design somewhere, or the design would never have needed me. He is afraid of the other one. A beat, flat, before the anesthetic wore off. Which means when we reach the river, the most dangerous thing I can do is exactly what everyone for 30 years on every side has been calling victory.
They left the undervault on the 9th morning by the eastern Emberway, and the leaving took half a day because the city would not be hurried about it. The company that rode out was no longer 10. Durm and his road patrol made it 20. The Deep King's word made iron, escorted, with 2 engineer wagons behind them loaded with the craft of the holds, sluice tools and sealstone, coal glass and lamp oil, everything a war against wrong water might want, and 1 long crate that Durm would say nothing about except that it was, the guild's regards, for the canyons, when the floor opens. Skalvar walked them the last mile of the Emberway himself, and his farewell at the ice store was a Deep King's. He stated the debts, both directions, and then broke form entirely, and embraced the healer of 2 worlds with arms like dock cranes, and said into her ear, gravel and grief and gratitude all braided. 11 years he dreamed you. You were better than the dream. Go teach the canyons to count. The lamp woman was waiting at the door itself. Of course she was, with her 2 burning sons on their chains, and Lena watched her hand them up to the king of the Cant Peaks one last time, and heard the new terms set in Bridgestone, the far side of the ice, this time. Light the way east, the pair of them. They always did like a long road, and when your river is closed or healed or whatever the healer decides, the old eyes were dry and terrible and fond. Bring them home to me lit. That is 3 debts now, elf. You are becoming quite affordable. And at the very last, as the ice door swung and the white morning of Frost Hollow poured in, a small figure broke the line of the crowd exactly as she had broken it once before. The lamp child of the Recovery Shallows, the 7th recalled, Saltcutter's daughter of the 9th terrace, and pressed into Lena's hands a second bead for the bootlace. Not salt this time. Coal glass, gilt-cut, faceted, holding a spark of the Emberway's orange fire at its heart that would not go out, the masters said, for 100 years. So you can see the count, the child said, chin at the fatal angle, even in the dark ones. Lena knelt on the threshold of the white waste and let a 7-year-old tie the light of the undervault beside the drum of Cantalar and the salt of the deep terraces, and understood, with the cup of the first graft warm against her back and 2 worlds' worth of small fierce tokens at her throat, that she had stopped being a stranger anywhere quite some time ago, and that this, the beads and the lamps and the debts stated plainly, was what the enemy, with all his patience and all his crystals, had never once in 30 years learned how to fight. If you have ever left a place carrying more than you brought to it, not heavier, more, then you know the company rode out onto the black glass of the eastern roads that morning in the best armor 2 worlds ever forged, and none of it was steel. The eastern frozen roads ran 9 days toward the canyon country, and the white waste let them run. It was a different crossing than the first, 20 strong, dwarf-guided, provisioned by a grateful nation, and a different company, learning itself nightly around Ithreni's doubled pans. Derm's patrol and Valus's wardens circled each other for 2 days with the wary professional courtesy of master craftsmen from rival guilds, and then, on the 3rd night, discovered the universal solvent of soldiers everywhere, complaint. By the 5th camp, the deep tongue and the elven watch signs were trading vocabulary across the fire. By the 7th, Durm had taught the wardens a dwarven marching song of magnificent filthiness that Doramir pretended at great cost not to understand. And Phelan, whose voice had come back husky and an octave down from 4 bells at the channel, to his enormous secret satisfaction, had taught the road patrol the count, and the 2 nations kept the night watches to one rhythm. Note for the record, the boy soldier rasped to Lena, watching a dwarf and an elf argue amiably over stew. The grand alliance of 2 worlds runs on soup and insults. My king conquered a city with a lamp, and you conquered one with a stethoscope, and Ithreni's conquering everything else with a ladle. Write it in the ledger, Lena said. It's the truest strategic assessment of the war to date. Lena stood her watches with Doramir under skies like the inside of a bell, and the file marked, kept required, as promised, no further documentation, though it received some anyway, nightly, in the wordless dialect of shoulders and shared cloaks, and the count kept close. She carried the cup of light wrapped against her back and felt it the way she'd learned to feel the tears pulse across a camp, a warmth that noticed her. Twice she woke from dreams of running water and found the wrapping faintly glowing, and once, she told only Doramir, she dreamed the workshop and the table saw winding down, and her father's voice saying, conversational, unhurried, 9 days is nothing, my girl. I once spent 9 days on a fence and woke with her face wet and her heart, for the first time in 11 years, entirely unclenched. The message for your mother, Doramir said, that dawn. The fence. When this is done, when the river is closed, or healed. It was out of her before she had decided anything, and they both heard it land, the enemy's question, the only question on the board, already living in her mouth. She looked east down the black glass toward the canyon country. He's afraid of the difference, Doramir. That means the difference is the weapon. I just don't know yet which side of it cuts him. She touched the cup's warm wrapping. But the water called me a healer 11 years before anyone else did. I suspect it's known my answer longer than I have. On the 9th day, the black glass ended. It ended at the rimfall, the great broken shelf where the fen country dropped away south and east into the red canyon lands, where the ice gave up in ragged ramparts and the ground beyond ran rust and umber into a haze of dust and distance, and the maps of 3 nations all wrote the same word over the far country in their 3 scripts, contested. The company stood at the shelf's edge in the last of the white morning, looking out over the roof of the hollow deep, and it was Valus, on point, who went still first, and raised one fist, and said, in the flat voice he saved for the hours that did not negotiate, "Camp sign. The overhang, below the fall. Hours old, the fires still breathing. They came down to it with bows out, and the count quiet on every lip. A soldier's camp, laid with a discipline 30 years deep, 1 bedroll's print, rations portioned and squared, a snapped bone needle swept into a tidy pile, and the fire banked with a craftsman's care to be found warm, which was not oversight, Valus said, which was a message in the oldest field grammar there was. I knew you were coming, I am not hiding, follow, and waited under a stone by the fire, folded with the terrible neatness of a man keeping the smallest faiths, they found the letter, unfinished, 3 lines, begun and struck and begun again, the hand controlled, and the control costing everything, and Doromir read it aloud once, by the warm fire, in a voice that held to the last word, and no further. Little Prince, I have started this letter 400 times in 30 years. I taught you the soldier's rule once. The first story of a disaster is drawn by the survivor's hand. So here is mine, before we meet, in case the canyons take the chance from us. I did not survive that bridge. The man who taught you the bow went into the gorge with her, and what walked east was only the part that couldn't stop reaching. If you have come to kill it, I will not run. But if you have come with her healer, if the stories running east are true, then hurry, Doromir. Because I have found what he is going to do at the pool, and I am going to be standing in front of it when he tries, and I would like, before the end, to have been reaching towards something agar. The line stopped. The strikeout began, and did not finish either. On the stone above the overhang, cut fresh that morning, the knife strokes still bright, was the writing. Not Sareth, this time. 2 words. In the flowing elven script, a princess had taught a homesick soldier 30 years and 2 funerals ago. Hurry, please. And below the words, an arrow, driven east, toward the canyons, toward the pool's country, toward the dust haze on the horizon that was not, Lena realized with the cold, arriving all at once, weather. Doromir. Her voice came out level, Trauma Bay level, which was how the whole company knew. The haze, read it. The king of the Kant Peaks looked east a long time, elf-eyed, at the rust-colored distance and the column of dust rising off it, wide as a river, days across, moving. Ash, he said quietly. The ash country is empty because the ash is here, his whole strength, healer, between us and the canyons, between us and the orcs, marching on the pool. He turned, and the tear pulsed hard at his throat, and Bram's and Otter's lamps burned steady on his belt, facing the east they had been promised. The bridge broke on both sides, and the man who knows why is a morning ahead of us, running toward the enemy's entire army, asking us to hurry. Lena Marlowe looked down at the fresh-cut plea of the first chosen, then east at the marching dust of 30 patient years, then down at her own hands, steady, always steady, 2 worlds of hours in them and a cup of light at her back, and gave the order that ended the second book of her second life, the way she gave every order that mattered, flatly, before the anesthetic wore off, with the count already moving in her blood. Then we hurry, said the healer. Mount up. The canyons need a doctor. And far to the east, at the head of a river of ash, a figure in a black cloak rode without haste, because the deathless never hasten, but the crystal at his spear tip had not stopped burning at its brightest since the night a thread ran home, and behind his hood, for the first time in 30 years, Morvath of the Terima was not rehearsing a design. He was rehearsing a question, close or heal. He had built 30 years on the arithmetic of doors. What closes can be reopened, what locks can be picked, what is sealed away survives to be unsealed. Every ending the short-lived races had ever engineered against him had merely rescheduled him, but the healer's word, the water's word, obeyed no arithmetic he owned. Healed flesh does not reopen. Healed wounds keep no door at all. And a deathless thing that has made its whole long existence out of one wound has never once had to imagine the world in which the wound is simply, permanently, gone. He was imagining it now. It was costing him. And things that cost Morvath of the Terima had always, throughout his long ash-colored history, been made to cost everyone else more. And in the space between the worlds, in the crack where a glass-eyed prophet had hidden for 3 decades, Sareth felt the question burning its way east, and gathered the last of her strength, and began, slowly, at terrible cost, for the 3rd time in 30 years, to move.